Imagine being handed the one thing every kid from the trenches dreams about. A record deal, millions on the table, and a real ticket out the hood and throwing it all away just to prove you're still a street knocker. Sounds crazy, right? Well, that's exactly what the dudes in this video did. These are young artists who had the talent, the buzz, and the money knocking at their door, but instead of choosing the mansion, they chose the block. Instead of being known as superstars, they wanted to be known as street dudes. And for most of them, it cost them everything. Today, we're going over rap's biggest crash dummies, dudes like Bloodhound Lil Jeff, PGF Nuke, Pooh Shiesty, and more. So sit back, lock in, and make sure you watch till the end, because the last one on this list might be the craziest crash out of rap history. Let's start it off with a dude whose name literally tells you everything you need to know. Anti the Menace. Here's a number that should stop you cold. $4 million. $4 million. That is not a streaming payout. That is not a feature fee. That is a record deal, a life-changing, generational, wealth-building, get your whole family out contract that was sitting on the table waiting to be signed. And the man on the other side of that table looked at it, understood exactly what it was, walked away from it, and chose the streets instead. Now here's the part that will keep you up at night. This was not a man who had nothing to lose. This was not a story of someone who had never seen a way out. Anti the Menace had already gone viral. He had already built a fan base. He had already shown the world that he had something real, a voice, a presence, a story that people connected with. The music industry had already looked at him and said, "We want to invest in you." And he still said no. So the question you have to sit with, the one this entire video is going to answer, is why? Why does a man who can see the exit door, who has the key in his hand, choose to walk back into the fire? Why does someone with $4 million in front of them decide that the streets are still worth more? And what happens when the streets take everything back? By the time this video is over, you are going to understand something deeper than just the story of Anti the Menace. You are going to understand the psychology of what happens when the streets become your identity before the music ever can. Stay with me until the end, because the last chapter of this story, the part about the 25 years, is going to hit different once you understand everything that came before it. Let's get into it. To understand Anti the Menace, you have to understand Atlanta, not the Atlanta of the BET Awards, and the Trap Museum, and the polished Instagram pages. The real Atlanta. The Atlanta that exists in the zip codes the tour buses never stop in, where the trap houses sit right next door to the churches, where the same block that produces the next rap star can swallow someone whole before they ever get a chance to be anything else. Atlanta has always had this duality. It is simultaneously the black Mecca, the city that produced more black millionaires, more black owned businesses, more black cultural exports than almost anywhere else on earth, in a city where poverty, violence, and street life run so deep in certain communities that for some young men, it does not just feel like a choice. It feels like the only option available. And that tension, that push and pull between what the city can give you and what it can take from you, is the exact tension that defined Anti the Menace's entire life. Anti the Menace, born Antione Menace, grew up in the trenches of Atlanta. His upbringing was not unusual for the environment he was raised in. He came up surrounded by the street culture that runs through the DNA of certain Atlanta neighborhoods like a river runs through stone. From an early age, the code of the streets was not something he learned in a classroom or observed from a distance. It was the air he breathed, the people around him, the older figures he looked up to, the way respect was earned and defended in his world. All of it was shaped by the gravity of street life. Growing up in those conditions does something to a person's sense of what is possible. When the dominant figures in your immediate world are operating in the street economy, when the people you see eating, who have cars, who have status, who command respect on the block, are the ones who are deep in the game, the lesson you absorb is not a conscious one. It is absorbed through observation, through osmosis, through years of watching and concluding that this is how things work. This is the world. This is how you survive in it. This is how you earn a place in it. And by the time those lessons are fully internalized, they are not just beliefs. They are the foundation of identity. For Anti the Menace, the streets were not a phase. They were not an experiment. They were the primary environment that shaped who he understood himself to be. And that matters enormously when you are trying to understand every decision he made afterward, including the one that cost him everything. This is important to understand, and it's something that gets glossed over constantly in these kinds of stories. People on the outside look at a young man who chooses the streets over a music deal and they call it stupid. They call it reckless. They call it a waste. And they are not entirely wrong, but what they miss is the weight of loyalty that street life imposes on the people inside it. When you grow up in those environments, the streets are not just a lifestyle, they are a relationship. They are a set of obligations. They are a brotherhood with its own rules, its own honor codes, and its own consequences for breaking them. Dummies was not just a young man who liked the idea of street life because it seemed cool, he was embedded in it. He had ties, real ties, deep ties, the kind that do not dissolve just because you get a record deal and start hearing your songs on the radio. That is the context that everything else in this story has to be read through. Now, Atlanta in the late 2010s and early 2020s was also a city in the middle of a musical explosion. The YSL era was in full swing. Young Thug and Gunna were rewriting what Atlanta rap could sound like. Lil Baby was making his historic come up, and in the middle of all of that creative energy, a new wave of young artists was emerging from the same streets that had always fed Atlanta's music scene. Young Nudie was operating. Future was still running his lane, and in the younger generation, a whole crop of artists were starting to bubble. Street rappers with authentic stories, hungry energy, and the kind of raw charisma that Atlanta rap had always rewarded. Dummies fit into this wave. He had the credentials, the authentic street background that Atlanta audiences could smell from a mile away if it was fake. He had the voice, he had the style, and most importantly, he had real stories to tell. In a genre that rewards authenticity above almost everything else, he had the real thing. The story of how Dummies went from being a name that only people in certain Atlanta circles knew to someone that the music industry had on its radar is a story that has become increasingly common in the streaming era, but it never gets any less remarkable when you watch it happen. It started, as so many Atlanta rap careers do, with the music speaking for itself. Dummies had a rawness to his delivery that people gravitated toward. He was not trying to be the next Young Thug or the next Lil Baby. He had his own thing, his own cadence, his own subject matter, his own way of painting pictures with words that came from a life lived in the specific circumstances he had come up in. And that specificity is what made him interesting. In the streaming era, authenticity is currency. You can have perfect production, perfect mixing, a perfect marketing budget, and if people cannot feel the truth behind the music, it will not connect. But when the truth is there, when listeners can tell that this person is not performing the character but actually speaking from lived experience, the connection happens fast and it happens hard. The Mensa's early music started circulating in Atlanta first, the way all real Atlanta bubbles begin. People in the streets were passing it around. The cultural gatekeepers, the people who decide what is real and what is not in the Atlanta street rap ecosystem, were paying attention. And then, the way these things tend to work, it started spreading beyond Atlanta. Social media picked it up. His numbers started climbing. The kind of organic growth that labels dream about started happening in real time. And when those streaming numbers start moving, the industry notices. This is how the music business works in 2020 and beyond. Labels are not just signing artists based on gut feelings anymore. They are watching data. They are tracking streams, social media engagement, search trends, playlist ads, and when they see an artist generating real organic numbers without major label support, without a significant marketing push, without any of the infrastructure that labels normally provide, that is when the meetings start happening. This is what happened with Dummies. The conversations started, people in the industry were paying attention, and ultimately those conversations led to something that most rappers spend their entire careers dreaming about: a legitimate, serious record deal offer with real money behind it. $4 million. Let that sink in one more time. In the context of independent rap deals, that is significant money. That is not a development deal where a label gives you a small advance and owns your entire future. That is the kind of offer that signals serious investment. That is the kind of money that comes with real resources, production budgets, marketing muscle, distribution reach, the kind of infrastructure that can take an artist who is already generating buzz and amplify that buzz into something massive. $4 million. Let that sink in one more time. In the context of independent rap deals, that is significant money. That is not a development deal where a label gives you a small advance and owns your entire future. That is the kind of offer that signals serious investment. That is the kind of money that comes with real resources. production budgets, marketing muscle, distribution reach, the kind of infrastructure that can take an artist who is already generating buzz and amplify that buzz into something massive. For a young man who grew up in Atlanta's trenches, $4 million is not just a number. It is the representation of every dream that the streets will tell you is impossible for someone who looks like you and comes from where you come from. It is proof that the music worked. It is proof that the world outside of your zip code had heard you and decided you were worth their most serious attention. It is the kind of moment that parents pray for when they watch their children grow up in those environments. The kind of moment that whole neighborhoods point to and say, "See, it is possible, it can happen." For Anti-Dements, this was the moment. This was the door opening. Everything he had been building toward, all the music, all the energy, all the authentic storytelling had led to this point. And the music industry was looking at him and saying, "We see you. We believe in you. Here is $4 million to prove it." What happened next is the part that defines this entire story. There is a concept in the streets that outsiders struggle to understand, and it is the concept of where your loyalty lives. When you have been embedded in street life for long enough, when the streets have been your family and your income and your identity for years, the idea of just walking away from all of that, even for $4 million, is not as simple as it sounds. Because the streets do not just let you go. There are people who depend on you. There are situations that require your involvement. There are codes of loyalty that in the world Anti-Dements came from were not negotiable. When you are deep in it, you cannot just announce that you are an artist now, sign a contract and disappear into the music industry. Life does not work that way when you are carrying the weight that he was carrying. This is not an excuse. Let that be crystal clear. What followed was a set of choices, and every adult human being is responsible for the choices they make. But it is context. It is the context that explains how a man with $4 million in front of him could still find himself pulled back into the street life that the music was supposed to be his escape from. The deal reportedly fell apart, whether it was negotiations that broke down, whether Anti-Dements walked away from the table, whether the label ultimately decided the risk was too high given his street involvement. The specific mechanics of how the deal died are less important than the fact that it did die. The $4 million evaporated, and Anti-Dements remained in the streets. There's also a conversation worth having about what walking away from a deal like that actually requires in practice, not just emotionally, but logistically. When you are operating in the street economy, there are people who depend on your participation. There are financial structures, informal but binding, that require your presence and your involvement. There are people you have made commitments to, people whose livelihoods in some way intersect with yours, people who would read your departure as abandonment or betrayal. The music business cannot sever those ties with a wire transfer, and no amount of A&R enthusiasm changes the reality that those ties exist, and that breaking them has consequences that the label never has to deal with. None of that makes the choice that Anti-Dements ultimately made the right one, but it is the full picture, and the full picture matters. Now here is where the story takes a turn that changes the entire trajectory of everything that follows. Because the streets that Anti-Dements stayed connected to were not just dangerous in the abstract sense. They were dangerous in a very specific, very legal, very documented sense. The activities that were happening around him that he was involved in were the kind of activities that leave paper trails, that attract attention, that create federal cases. And the law was paying attention. When the news broke that Anti-Dements had been arrested, it was not exactly shocking to people who had been following his situation closely. This is one of the most painful and most predictable aspects of these stories. When someone has one foot in the music world and one foot in the streets, the arrests rarely come as a surprise. They come as a confirmation of what people who cared about him had probably been worried about for a while. The charges were serious. This was not a minor situation, not a traffic stop turned sideways, not a simple possession case. The charges against Anti-Dements were the kind that carry real time, the kind that make you understand that the legal system was not treating this as a minor matter. The evidence that law enforcement had been building was significant enough that when they moved with purpose. The arrest sent shockwaves through his fan base and through the Atlanta music community. Here was a man who had been on the verge of something, who had demonstrated real talent, who had generated real industry interest, now sitting behind bars. And the question that everyone was asking was the same question. How long? How bad is this going to be? At this point in the story, a new character enters who deserves significant attention of his own. because the person who stepped up to bail out Anti the Mints was not just anyone, it was Raylo. If you are not familiar with Rollo, let me give you the necessary background, because understanding who Rollo is makes the bail situation make complete sense, and also makes what happened next even more significant. Farrad Kane, known professionally as Rollo, is one of Atlanta's most complicated and compelling figures. He built his name in Atlanta's street rap scene through a combination of authentic street credibility and genuine musical talent. He was affiliated with Gucci Mane's 1017 Records at various points in his career, which already tells you something about his standing in the Atlanta rap ecosystem. He released music that resonated in the streets, built a loyal following, and established himself as a significant voice in Atlanta's underground rap scene. But Rollo's story is also deeply intertwined with the legal system. He had his own run-ins with federal law enforcement. He had spent time dealing with serious legal situations of his own. He understood from firsthand experience what it meant to be a young black man from Atlanta with street ties sitting in a federal holding facility looking at serious charges. That experience, that personal knowledge of what it feels like to be on the inside looking out, is part of what drove Raylo to step up for Anti the Mints. When Raylo put up $150,000 in bail money for Anti the Mints, it was not just a financial transaction, it was a statement. It was an act of loyalty rooted in genuine understanding of the situation. $150,000. That is not pocket change even for someone with Rollo's resources. That is a serious commitment. That is someone putting their money where their mouth is in the most literal sense, putting their own financial resources on the line as a demonstration of faith in another person. Rollo looked at the situation, looked at Anti the Mints, and decided that he was worth that investment. He decided that this was someone who deserved the chance to get out, breathe some air, get their life together, and figure out a path forward. And it was not just about the money. Rollo also reportedly spoke publicly about his support for Anti the Mints, making clear that he believed in him both as an artist and as a person. He was essentially vouching for him, telling the world and telling Anti the Mints himself that someone with resources and standing in the community was in his corner. Think about what that means in the context of everything that had already happened. The $4 million deal had fallen through, the arrest had happened, but now here was Rollo, an established figure in Atlanta rap, someone with real credibility and real resources, standing up and saying, "I've got this man. I believe in him. Let him out and let's see what he does with the opportunity." It was, in every sense of the word, a second chance, a lifeline. A moment where the universe was essentially presenting Anti the Mints with another door, a different door than the $4 million deal, but a door nonetheless, a chance to walk out of that facility, look at his situation with fresh eyes, and choose differently than he had chosen before. Anti the Mints walked out. The bail was posted. He was free. And for 14 days, 2 weeks exactly, it seemed like maybe things were going to be different. Maybe the arrest had been a wake-up call. Maybe the reality of sitting behind bars or watching the music career get further away while the legal system closed in had clarified something for him. Maybe Rollo's extraordinary act of loyalty has shifted something internally. 14 days. That is all it took before Anti the Mints was back in custody. 2 weeks after walking out on $150,000 of Rollo's money, 2 weeks after being given a second chance that most people in this position would never receive, Anti the Mints was arrested again. The circumstances of his rearrest made clear that in those 14 days of freedom, he had not taken the opportunity to distance himself from the activities and associations that had gotten him locked up in the first place. The rearrest was not a random event. It was not a case of wrong place, wrong time, bad luck. Law enforcement had been watching. The investigation that had led to his initial arrest had not stopped just because he had made bail. The people building the case against him had continued building it. And when Anti the Mints walked back out into the world and continued operating the way he had been operating before, he walked right back into the crosshairs that were already pointed at him. This is the moment in the story where the tragedy becomes undeniable, because there's a difference between someone making a mistake and someone making a pattern of choices. The first arrest could be described as the consequence of choices made before the wake-up call. But going back, within 14 days with a $150,000 bail posted on his behalf, that is a different kind of statement. That is someone who on some level could not or would not separate themselves from the world they were operating in. The questions that swirl around this moment are the hardest ones in the entire story. Did he feel like he had no choice? Did the obligations of street life feel so binding that even 2 weeks of freedom was not enough to create the distance needed? Was there a situation that pulled him back and that felt unavoidable? Or was it simply that the street identity had become so central to who he understood himself to be that operating any other way felt impossible? We may never know exactly what A&T.I. the Mints was thinking in those 14 days. We may never know what specific circumstances led him back to the situation that got him rearrested. But what we know was the outcome, and the outcome was catastrophic. When the news broke that A&T.I. the Mints had been rearrested, just 2 weeks after Rallo posted $150,000 to get him out, the reaction was immediate, and it was loud. In the Atlanta music and street communities, where reputation and loyalty are currencies that matter as much as cash, this was a significant event. Rallo had made a public major financial commitment to A&T.I. the Mints. He had put his name and his money behind this man in a way that was visible to everyone. And now, 14 days later, A&T.I. the Mints had gone back and done exactly what had gotten him locked up in the first place, essentially burning the bridge that Rallo had built and burning it with Rallo's own resources. Rallo's reaction, by most accounts, was a reaction of a man who was simultaneously frustrated, hurt, and, if you read between the lines, not entirely surprised. When you come from the same world that A&T.I. the Mints came from, when you have seen how deep those street ties run, when you have been in situations yourself where the pull of the streets felt stronger than logic, you understand, even if you cannot accept, how something like this happens. There were reports and social media posts suggesting that Rallo expressed his frustration publicly, and the frustration was entirely understandable. $150,000 gone. Not because A&T.I. the Mints had violated some technicality, not because of some circumstance beyond his control, but because he had gone back to the same streets within 2 weeks of walking out. The broader community's reaction was split in the way these reactions always are. There were people who were angry, who felt that A&T.I. the Mints had wasted not just his own opportunity, but had disrespected someone who had gone out of their way to help him. There were people who were sad, who genuinely liked his music, who had been hoping that the arrest would be the turning point, who were now watching those hopes evaporate. There were people who felt vindicated in whatever concerns they had already had about the situation. And there were people, the ones who knew him best, the ones from his immediate circle, who were probably not surprised at all, even if they could not say that publicly. The social media discourse around his rearrest touched on everything that comes up in these conversations: wasted potential, the cost of street loyalty, the way certain environments make it nearly impossible for people to break free even when the door is open, the question of personal responsibility versus systemic circumstances, all of the big, heavy, real questions that do not have simple answers. But whatever the discourse was doing online, the reality on the ground was stark. A&T.I. the Mints was back in custody. This time, there was not going to be a bail situation. This time, the charges were going to be faced head on. And this time, the legal system was going to deliver a verdict that would define the rest of his life. 25 years. When the sentence came down, it landed like a body blow on everyone who had been following the case. 25 years in federal prison is not a number that allows for easy comfort or easy rationalization. That is not a situation where someone does 5 years, gets out, and still has their 30s or 40s ahead of them to rebuild. 25 years means that A&T.I. the Mints will be entering his middle age by the time he sees the outside world again. It means that the world will have changed in ways that are almost impossible to predict. It means that the music career, the deal, the viral moment, the buzz, all of it is not just paused, it is over. The evidence that prosecutors brought against A&T.I. the Mints was significant, and it is important to understand what it was that landed him with a sentence of that magnitude. Federal cases are built methodically. Federal prosecutors do not move unless they believe they have the evidence to win. And in A&T.I. the Mints' case, by the time the case went to court, the government had constructed what appeared to be a comprehensive picture of his criminal activity. The charges involved serious criminal conduct, the kind of activity that federal law enforcement treats with maximum seriousness and pursues with maximum resources. The evidence reportedly included recorded communications, witness testimony, financial records, and the kind of documented pattern of behavior that federal prosecutors use to construct RICO-style cases. This was not a situation where someone was caught in a single incident and faced charges based on one event. This was a situation where law enforcement had been watching, building, documenting, and had assembled a case that painted a detailed picture of sustained criminal activity over time. What made the case particularly damaging was the duration and scope of the documented activity. Federal investigators are patient in a way that local law enforcement often is not. They do not rush, they build. They wait until the picture is complete, until the evidence is overwhelming, until the case they bring into a courtroom is the kind that is extremely difficult to challenge. And by the time they brought their case against Dummies, it was exactly that kind of case. The evidence was substantial enough that the defense did not have an easy path to challenge it. When you are facing federal charges with that kind of evidentiary backing, when the government has documented communications, has financial trails, has witnesses who have agreed to cooperate, the options narrow significantly. Juries respond to comprehensive federal cases in ways that make the odds daunting. The conviction rate in federal criminal trials is extraordinarily high. Walking into a federal courtroom against a fully built case is one of the most difficult positions a person can find themselves in legally. And the sentence that came down reflected both the severity of the charges and the weight of the evidence supporting them: 25 years. For context, 25 years in federal prison means serving at least 85% of the sentence under federal sentencing guidelines. That is over 20 years of actual time. That is the kind of sentence that reshapes your entire life trajectory. The person who walks out after serving that time will be a fundamentally different person than the young artist who was going viral, getting record deal offers and making waves in Atlanta's music scene. The world he walks back into will be almost unrecognizable. Technology will have changed. The music industry will have changed. The people in his life will have changed. Some gone, some moved on, some transformed beyond recognition. This is the section of the story that hurts the most to sit with. Not because of what happened, as tragic as it is, but because of the clarity of what could have happened instead. Because when you lay out the trajectory that was available to Dummies, when you trace the path that was sitting right in front of him, the gap between what was possible and what actually happened becomes almost unbearable to look at directly. Think about Atlanta rap in the period when Dummies was generating buzz. The artists who were making it, the ones who were breaking through and building lasting careers, were largely artists who had similar backgrounds to his. Lil Baby had street ties, Young Thug had street ties, Gunna had street ties. The Atlanta rap ecosystem was not asking artists to pretend they came from somewhere they did not. It was asking them to take the raw material of their real lives and transmute it into music, to turn the pain and the experience and the code of the streets into art that could be monetized, that could travel, that could build something sustainable. Dummies had all of the raw material. He had the authentic background, he had the voice, he had shown the ability to generate organic attention, the hardest thing to manufacture in the music business. And the industry had looked at all of that and put $4 million on the table as a statement of what they believe was possible. $4 million represents more than just money. It represents a team of people, A&R executives, marketing professionals, producers, managers who believed in the potential they saw. People in the music industry do not write 8-figure checks based on charity. They write them based on projected returns. When a label offers $4 million, they are expressing their belief that the return on that investment could be substantial. They are betting that this artist, with the right support and infrastructure, could generate 10 times that, 20 times that, in streaming revenue, touring revenue, merchandise, endorsements. So the $4 million deal was not just $4 million. It was a bet on the potential future worth hundreds of millions. It was an acknowledgement that Dummies had something rare, something that could not be manufactured or tore apart. It was a door to a life that very few people who come from where he came from ever get offered. And the cruelest part of the wasted potential conversation is this: the talent was undeniable. People who were familiar with his music, people whose opinion in the Atlanta rap ecosystem carries real weight, understood that there was something genuinely special there, not just technically competent, not just authentically credentialed, but actually genuinely, undeniably talented. The kind of talent that with the right support and the right timing could have built a career that lasted decades. The kind of talent that turns one viral moment into a catalog, turns a fan base into a movement, turns a record deal into a legacy. That talent still exists, of course, in whatever recordings remain, but it is frozen there, suspended in time, a snapshot of what could have been. It cannot grow from where Dummies is now. It cannot evolve or respond to the world or find new dimensions. The music that exists is all there is ever going to be for 25 years at minimum. And that is the specific particular tragedy of wasted artistic potential. It is not just that the artist suffers, though they do. It is that the art that was waiting to be made is now permanently unmade. The albums that could have existed do not exist. The collaborations that could have happened will not happen. The fans who would have been moved by music that was never recorded will never know what they missed. And he could not walk through it. The reasons are complex, and we have already spent significant time in this video trying to honor that complexity. The street ties were real. The obligations were real. The identity that had been built over years was real. You cannot simply dissolve those things because a record deal appears. The psychology of the streets runs deeper than that, but the outcome is also real. And the outcome is 25 years. When you sit with both of those truths simultaneously, the complexity of why he could not or would not break from the streets, and the devastating reality of the sentence that resulted from that choice, you end up in a place of profound sadness that does not resolve neatly. You cannot call ANTI the men simply stupid. That does not capture the complexity of what happened. But you also cannot pretend that a different set of choices was not available to him, because it clearly was. The $4 million deal was real. The viral music was real. The path forward existed, and it was not taken. There's a conversation that needs to happen in hip-hop culture, a real, honest, uncomfortable conversation about the relationship between street credibility and artistic identity. Because the ANTI the Mint story is not unique. It is one version of a story that has played out dozens of times in Atlanta, and in Chicago, and in New York, and in Los Angeles, and in every city where hip-hop and street life have grown up together in the same communities. The dynamic works like this. The streets produce the authenticity that hip-hop values above almost everything else. The most compelling rap music has almost always come from artists who are speaking from real experience, who know the code because they live by it, who understand the streets because the streets shape them. And that authenticity, that realness is what connects with audiences. It is what generates the streams, the viral moments, the industry interest. But the streets do not produce authenticity for free. They charge for it. They charge with legal exposure, with the constant threat of violence, with the web of obligations and loyalties that do not simply disappear because you have a recording contract. And the tragic irony is that the same credential that makes these artists valuable to the music industry, the real street experience, can also be the thing that prevents them from ever fully crossing over into the life that music could give them. ANTI the Mint was caught in this trap. His street background was real enough to generate authentic music that people connected with, and that same background was real enough that walking away from it completely, breaking the ties, changing the patterns, accepting that the music was the way out, was something he could not quite do. And the music industry, for all of its interest and all of its money, is not equipped to address that problem. A $4 million record deal does not come with mental health support, does not come with a team dedicated to helping an artist process the trauma and navigate their way out. It comes with a studio, a marketing budget, and an expectation of product delivery. The infrastructure that artists in the Mint situation actually need. The real support system that could help someone navigate the transition from street life to music career is not something that exists in any meaningful institutional form. That is not an excuse for what happened, but it is a systemic observation that is worth sitting with, because until the industry and the culture develops better ways of supporting artists in these transitions, the the Mint story is going to keep repeating itself. We are going to keep watching artists with $4 million potential end up with 25-year sentences. And that is a loss that extends beyond the individual. It is a loss for the fans who wanted to hear what their artists would have made. It is a loss for the communities that produced them and could have benefited from their success. It is a loss for hip-hop itself, which keeps burying its talent in prison cells instead of speaker systems. Before we close out this video, there is one more element of the Rallo chapter that deserves a deeper look, because it reveals something important about the Atlanta rap ecosystem and the way solidarity functions within it. Rallo's decision to put up $150,000 for ANTI the Mint was not a business decision. Let that be clear. There is no rational financial calculus that makes that bail money a smart investment. Rallo was not expecting a return on that capital. He was not making a deal. He was making a statement about what it means to be someone who comes from where they come from and holds the values that the streets demand you hold. Loyalty That is the word that explains the $150,000. In the world that both Rallo and Anti-Dements operate in, loyalty is not just a nice idea. It is the foundational principle around which everything else is organized. You stand up for people in your circle. You do not abandon someone when they are down. And if you have resources and someone needs them, you deploy those resources. That is the code. Rallo, despite his own legal difficulties, despite the obvious financial risk, despite the reasonable concern that his money might be used to fund someone's continued criminal activity, put up the bail because the code demanded it. And in that sense, the $150,000 is actually a perfect encapsulation of the very dynamic that trapped Anti-Dements in the first place. The same loyalty code that moved Rallo to bail him out is the same loyalty code that made it so difficult for Anti-Dements to simply walk away from his street obligations and build a music career. Loyalty, the street's highest value, was simultaneously the thing that rescued Anti-Dements from his first arrest and the thing that made it impossible for him to stay free after the rescue. It is a loop that is almost Greek in its tragic structure. The same force that saves you is the same force that destroys you. When Anti-Dements went back in 2 weeks later, Rallo reportedly lost not just the $150,000, though that loss was real and significant, but something more intangible. He lost the belief he had made a public investment in. He had told the world, through his actions, that this man deserved a second chance, and the situation had made a liar out of that investment. But it is worth noting that even Rallo's frustration at the situation did not translate into public condemnation of Anti-Dements as a person, because in the culture they both came from, you do not abandon people even when they have failed you. You may be hurt, you may be frustrated, you may learn your lesson about future financial decisions, but you do not publicly turn on someone who is now facing 25 years. That is not how the code works. So where does this story leave us? What is the state of Anti-Dements' world right now? And what does the aftermath of his conviction look like? The music that Anti-Dements made before his incarceration still exists. It still circulates in certain corners of Atlanta's rap ecosystem, the way the music of incarcerated artists always circulates, with a different emotional weight than it had before, carrying the knowledge of what came after. His story has become one of those cautionary tales that gets referenced in discussions about potential, about choices, about the price of the streets. His fan base, the people who genuinely connected with his music, who saw in him something real and compelling, largely reacted the way fans always react to these situations. There was grief, there was anger, there was the particular sadness that comes from watching someone with real talent arrive at a destination that makes that talent irrelevant, at least for the foreseeable future. The Atlanta music scene moved on as it always does. There is always the next artist, the next wave, the next person bubbling up from the same streets with the same hunger and the same stories to tell. That is the inexhaustible engine of Atlanta rap. The streets keep producing and the music keeps coming. But every so often, one of those stories ends the way Anti-Dements' story ended. And when it does, it is a reminder of what the machine costs the people it runs on. The $4 million deal is gone. The viral moment that generated it is a historical artifact. The music remains. And Anti-Dements is 25 years into a sentence that will define the rest of his life in ways that no record deal ever could have. That is the reality. That is where the story lands. When you look at the whole picture, when you step back and take in everything from the origins in Atlanta streets, to the viral music, to the $4 million deal, to the first arrest, to Rallo's $150,000, to the 2 weeks of freedom, to the rearrest, to the 25-year sentence, what you are really looking at is a story about identity, about how the identity that the streets build in you can become so central to who you understand yourself to be that the threat of losing it feels more dangerous than any legal consequence. About how the same authenticity that makes someone a compelling artist can also be the anchor that keeps them from escaping the world that authenticity came from. About how loyalty, one of the most human and most admirable values, can function as a trap when the system it operates within has no legitimate off-ramp. Anti-Dements was not just a rapper who made bad decisions. He was a human being caught in one of the most brutal tensions that American life produces. The gap between where you come from and where you are trying to go, and the impossible navigation required to cross it without losing yourself or your people in the process. The $4 million represented one version of his future. The 25-year sentence represents another, and somewhere between those two numbers is the life that actually happened. A life that in its tragedy is trying to tell us something real about the conditions that produce it and the choices that play out inside those conditions. There's a reason these stories keep happening. It is not because the people involved are uniquely foolish or uniquely reckless or uniquely incapable of understanding consequences. Most of them understand the consequences perfectly well. And T.I., the mensch, knew what a federal charge looked like. He had already been through the arrest process. He had sat in a holding facility. He had watched Rollo count out $150,000 on his behalf. He knew exactly what was at stake when he walked out of that facility, and he still made the choices he made. That is not ignorance. That is something deeper. Something about the weight of identity and obligation that cannot be resolved by simply knowing the facts. What that means for anyone watching this video who cares about these issues beyond just the drama of the story is that information is not the solution. You should make better choices is not a useful message when the forces pulling someone back to the streets operate at a level deeper than rational decision making. The solution, if there is one, has to address the identity, has to address the obligations, has to create real alternatives to the street loyalty structures that hold people in place, has to be present before the viral moment and before the record deal offer, not scrambling to provide support after the arrest has already happened. The waste is real. There's no other word for 25 years when 4 million was on the table. But the waste is not simply the product of one man's poor judgment. It is the product of a set of circumstances, of streets that claim you early and hold you tight, of a music industry that wants your authenticity without wanting to deal with what comes with it, of a culture that idolizes the credibility that street life produces without reckoning honestly with the price it charges for that credibility. And T.I., the mensch, threw away a $4 million deal to be in the streets, and the streets took everything. That is the headline, that is the tragedy, that is the story. But the story does not belong only to him. It belongs to every artist sitting on the same knife's edge right now. In Atlanta and everywhere else, the ones who have the talent and the buzz and the industry interest, and who are still trying to figure out how to hold on to who they are while becoming something different. The ones for whom the exit door is visible but the cost of walking through it feels impossibly high. The ones who are right now weighing a deal against a loyalty, a future against a present obligation, a music career against everything the streets have ever given them and demanded from them. For those people and for everyone watching this video, the A&T.I. the mensch story is a mirror. Look into it. Understand what it is reflecting. Understand what the streets give and what the streets take. Understand the difference between loyalty that builds you and loyalty that buries you. And ask yourself, or the people you know who are in that position, the hardest question this whole story raises when the door is open and the key is in your hand and someone has put up $150,000 to give you a second chance, what are you going to do with it? That is the question, A&T. The mensch could not answer the way the world needed him to. And that question right there is what this entire story has really been about. If this video gave you something to think about, if it made you see this story in a way you had not before, drop it in the comments. Tell me what part hit different. Tell me what you think he should have done differently and whether you even believe differently was a realistic option given everything he was carrying. The comment section on this one is going to be a real conversation and I want to be in it with you. And if you want to see more stories like this, the real ones, the ones that go deeper than the headline, make sure you are subscribed because we are not done. There is too much left to cover.
We all heard stories of parents doing their absolute best to raise a child, right? Trying to keep them away from the streets, but failing because of the child's own choices. But what if I told you that Bloodhound Lil Jeff's parents didn't just fail to keep him from the streets? They literally raised him to be the streets. What if I told you his family didn't just enable his path to becoming one of Chicago's most feared killers? They celebrated it, encouraged it, and turned murder into a family business.
I'm taking just a killing school. Class start next week. You gotta at least have 2 bodies.
In 2024, Jeffrey Harris, known as Bloodhound Lil Jeff, was gunned down in Chicago while attempting what would be his final drill. But this ain't just another story about a young man lost to street violence. This is the disturbing story of how an entire family systematically created a damn demon, and how that demon's reign of terror was exactly what they wanted all along. By the end of this video, you're gonna understand how the Harris family turned their son into a killing machine, celebrated his murders, and even after his death, continued to glorify the violence that defined his short life. Stay until the end, because what his father posted after Jeff's death will show you just how deep this family's sickness really goes. The family operated out of Chicago's South Side, where respect is earned through fear and violence is just another form of communication. But what made the Harris family different wasn't just their involvement in street life. It was how they treated that life like a legacy to be passed down like some twisted family tradition. Jeff's mother wasn't just complicit in this lifestyle, she was an active participant. While most mothers pray their sons stay away from violence, she would literally text Jeff congratulating him on successful hits. This wasn't a case of parents losing control of their child. This was a case of parents molding their child into exactly what they wanted him to become.
Niggas be out here, damn, got y'all mama crying and shit, man. That's the most, that shit. Ain't right wrong, bro. That's the most that you could do to OG in the world.
The Bloodhound gang that Jeff would eventually join wasn't some random crew he fell into. It was a family operation with his older brother Jay Boogie already established as a key member. This was generational street politics, where being a Harris meant being a killer, and being a killer meant making the family proud. Jeff's father came up in Chicago during the crack epidemic of the 80s and 90s, when the city was literally a war zone. He earned his stripes during some of the most violent periods in Chicago's history, building a reputation that would follow him for decades. On the streets, respect for the Harris name wasn't just given, it was enforced through violence. The elder Harris wasn't just some small-time dealer or gang member. He was connected to major players in Chicago's criminal hierarchy, moving significant weight and controlling territory that other crews could only dream of accessing. His reputation was built on a foundation of bodies, rivals who had challenged him and lost permanently. During the height of the crack wars, Jeff's father was involved in multiple gang conflicts that left dozens dead. He survived shootouts that claimed the lives of many of his contemporaries.
MPD released this footage today. It shows 3 men running and shooting toward the victim right before police were called.
Earning a reputation for being both smart and ruthless. The streets knew that crossing the Harris family meant signing your own death warrant. His mother's background was equally rooted in street culture, but her story was even more complex. She came from a family of hustlers and killers on the West Side, where women were expected to be just as hard as the men. Her own brothers were notorious in their neighborhoods, and she grew up understanding that violence was just another tool for solving problems. When Jeff's parents met in the mid-90s, it wasn't some romantic fairy tale. They were introduced through mutual criminal associates who thought their combined connections could be profitable. Their relationship was built on shared values, money, respect, and the willingness to eliminate anyone who threatened either. Their courtship involved planning robberies together, with Jeff's mother serving as both lookout and getaway driver. She wasn't some innocent woman who got swept up in her man's lifestyle. She was an active participant who brought her own criminal skills to the relationship. They had Jeffrey in the late 1990s, right in the middle of their prime street years. From day one, little Jeff wasn't raised with normal childhood expectations. While other kids were learning ABCs, Jeff was learning street codes. While other parents were teaching their children to avoid conflict, the Harris family was teaching Jeff that conflict was how you earned respect. The household operated like a criminal enterprise. Conversations at the dinner table weren't about school or sports. They were about territory, rivals, and respect. Jeff grew up hearing stories about his father's exploits like other kids heard bedtime stories. Violence wasn't something to be avoided in the Harris household. It was something to aspire to. By the time Jeff was old enough to understand what his family really did, he had already internalized their values completely. The streets weren't something he fell into. They were his inheritance, passed down through generations of Harris family criminality. Growing up in the Harris household meant Jeff's education started early, but it wasn't the kind of education most parents provide. While other kids were learning right from wrong, Jeff was learning how to move in the streets without getting caught. His parents didn't shield him from their lifestyle, they made him a student of it. Jeff's father would take him on rides through different neighborhoods, pointing out territories, explaining beefs, and teaching him how to read the streets. These weren't casual drives. They were lessons in survival and dominance. Jeff learned to identify rival gang members before he learned to ride a bike properly. These educational tours were comprehensive and systematic. His father would explain the history of different blocks, who controlled what territory, and why certain areas were off limits. Jeff learned about the economics of the drug trade, the politics of gang alliances, and the importance of maintaining respect through fear. His mother played her part too, teaching Jeff how to talk to police, how to keep his mouth shut, and how to never show weakness. She would drill him on street codes like other mothers drill their kids on multiplication tables. In the Harris household, snitching was worse than murder, and showing fear was worse than dying. The family's lessons weren't just theoretical.
I feel if I get mad enough, the shit will start happening. I went black for like a week, and poof. Gotta go after that one. Poof.
They would create scenarios where Jeff had to demonstrate what he had learned. His father would have associates approach Jeff to test whether he would reveal family business. His mother would quiz him on proper responses to police questioning. Jeff's education also included practical skills that most children never learn. He was taught how to handle weapons safely, how to plan escape routes, and how to read people's intentions through their body language. These weren't skills for a normal childhood, they were preparation for a life of crime. The family's reputation meant Jeff grew up with a target on his back, but also with protection. Other kids knew not to mess with him because of who his father was. This gave Jeff a sense of power and entitlement that would shape his entire worldview. He learned early that the Harris name carried weight, and that weight came from violence. But Jeff wasn't just absorbing these lessons passively. His parents actively tested him, putting him in situations where he had to prove he understood what they were teaching him. They wanted to make sure their son wouldn't just carry the family name, he would live up to it. By elementary school, Jeff was already displaying the characteristics his parents wanted to see. He was fearless in confrontations with other children, never backed down from fights, and showed no remorse when he hurt someone. His teachers saw these as warning signs, but his parents saw them as proof their training was working. The family celebrated Jeff's aggressive behavior at school. When he got suspended for fighting, they took him out for dinner. When he intimidated other children, they praised his dominance. They were systematically reinforcing every violent tendency while discouraging any signs of empathy or compassion. By the time Jeff was a teenager, he had already been shaped into exactly what his parents wanted, a young man who saw violence as normal, respect as everything, and fear as weakness. The foundation for Bloodhound Lil Jeff had been laid through years of careful, deliberate conditioning. Despite everything his family had taught him, Jeff still had moments where he dreamed of a different life. Basketball became his escape, the one thing that made him feel like he could be something other than what his family expected. He was actually talented too. Quick, athletic, with good court vision and natural instincts for the game. For a brief period during middle school and early high school, Jeff genuinely believed he could make it to the NBA. He would spend hours practicing at local courts, dreaming of getting out of Chicago through basketball. It was probably the only time in his life when he imagined a future that didn't involve violence. Jeff's basketball skills were legitimate. He could handle the ball well, had a decent shot, and understood the game at a level that impressed his coaches. Several of his teachers and coaches saw basketball as Jeff's ticket to a better life and encouraged him to focus on academics to maintain his eligibility. But his parents saw these dreams differently. To them, Jeff's basketball aspirations weren't admirable. They were goofy. They had raised him to be a street legend, not some athlete chasing a ball around. When Jeff would talk about making the varsity team or getting a scholarship, his father would laugh and tell him to focus on real life. The family's attitude toward Jeff's basketball dreams revealed everything about their values. They didn't want their son to escape the streets. They wanted him to dominate them. Success to the Harris family wasn't measured in touchdowns or trophies. It was measured in fear and respect. Jeff's mother was particularly hostile to his basketball ambitions. She would schedule family business during his practice times, forcing him to choose between basketball and family loyalty. She would also criticize him for spending time on kid games when he could be learning skills that would actually matter in the real world. The family's sabotage of Jeff's basketball dreams was subtle but effective. They would create conflicts that forced him to miss practices, discourage him from forming relationships with teammates, and constantly remind him that basketball was a distraction from his real destiny. When Jeff failed to make the varsity team his sophomore year, it crushed him. The rejection was particularly painful because he had genuinely believed basketball could be his way out. But instead of encouraging him to keep trying or find other positive outlets, his family saw it as confirmation that he was meant for the streets. His father's response to Jeff's basketball failure was telling. He told Jeff it was time to stop playing games and start building his real reputation. He said the Harris name meant something in the streets, and it was time for Jeff to start living up to that legacy. His mother was even more direct. She told Jeff that basketball was for kids who didn't have what it takes to be real players in the streets. She said the Harris name meant something, and it was time for Jeff to start living up to it. She reminded him that his family had invested years in preparing him for street life, and basketball was just a distraction from his true calling. The failure to make varsity became the turning point where Jeff fully embraced what his family had always wanted him to become. His dreams of the NBA died, and his transformation into Bloodhound Lil Jeff began. The family had successfully eliminated the last obstacle to their son's criminal destiny. Jeff's older brother, Jay Boogie, was already deep in the streets when Jeff's basketball dreams collapsed. Jay Boogie had followed the family path perfectly. He was respected, feared, and making serious money through violence and intimidation. To Jeff, his older brother represented everything he was supposed to become. Jay Boogie wasn't just Jeff's brother, he became his mentor in street life. While their parents had laid the foundation, Jay Boogie provided the practical education. He taught Jeff how to move, how to think, and how to survive in Chicago's most dangerous neighborhoods. The relationship between the brothers was complex but crucial to Jeff's development. Jay Boogie genuinely loved Jeff, but his version of love meant preparing his little brother for a life of violence. He would tell Jeff stories about his own exploits, not to scare him away from the streets, but to show him what success looked like in their world. Jay Boogie's street resume was impressive, even by Chicago standards. He had been involved in multiple shootings. Jeff's older brother, Jay Boogie, was already deep in the streets when Jeff's basketball dreams collapsed. Jay Boogie had followed the family path perfectly. He was respected, feared, and making serious money through violence and intimidation. To Jeff, his older brother represented everything he was supposed to become. Jay Boogie wasn't just Jeff's brother, he became his mentor in street life. While their parents had laid the foundation, Jay Boogie provided the practical education. He taught Jeff how to move, how to think, and how to survive in Chicago's most dangerous neighborhoods. The relationship between the brothers was complex but crucial to Jeff's development. Jay Boogie genuinely loved Jeff, but his version of love meant preparing his little brother for a life of violence. He would tell Jeff stories about his own exploits, not to scare him away from the streets, but to show him what success looked like in their world. Jay Boogie's street resume was impressive even by Chicago standards. He had been involved in multiple shootings, controlled significant drug territory, and had earned respect from older, more established criminals. His reputation opened doors that would have been closed to someone his age under normal circumstances. Under Jay Boogie's guidance, Jeff learned the practical skills he would need to survive and thrive in street life. How to handle weapons safely and effectively, how to plan operations with multiple contingencies, how to read situations and identify threats before they became deadly. Jay Boogie's teaching methods were hands-on and comprehensive. He would take Jeff on actual operations, gradually increasing his involvement and responsibility. Jeff started as a lookout, then became a driver, and eventually participated directly in violent confrontations. The brothers developed a bond that went beyond family. They became partners in violence. Jay Boogie saw Jeff's potential and was determined to help him reach it. He knew his little brother had the intelligence and ruthlessness to become something special in the streets. Jay Boogie also taught Jeff about the business side of street life, how to manage money, how to build and maintain a crew, how to form alliances and when to break them. These weren't just survival skills. They were leadership skills that would serve Jeff well as his reputation grew. Jeff looked up to Jay Boogie with a mixture of love and admiration that bordered on worship. Everything Jay Boogie did, Jeff wanted to do better. Every level of respect Jay Boogie achieved, Jeff wanted to surpass. This competitive dynamic between the brothers would drive Jeff to take increasingly extreme risks. Jay Boogie was already a key member of the Bloodhound gang, and he had big plans for his little brother. The gang wasn't just some random crew, it was becoming a family operation, with the Harris brothers positioned to be its future leaders. The mentorship relationship between Jay Boogie and Jeff was crucial to Jeff's transformation. Without his brother's guidance and protection, Jeff might have made fatal mistakes early in his criminal career. Jay Boogie's experience and connections gave Jeff a significant advantage over other young criminals trying to make their mark. The Bloodhound gang didn't start as some massive criminal organization. It began as a small crew of young men from the same neighborhood who were tired of being pushed around by older, more established gangs. What made Bloodhound different from the beginning was their willingness to be more violent than anyone else. The gang formed in the early 2000s when Chicago's gang landscape was shifting dramatically. Traditional gang structures were breaking down due to police pressure and internal conflicts, and smaller, more aggressive crews were carving out their own territories. Bloodhound positioned itself as the most ruthless of these new crews. The founding members of Bloodhound were all young men who had grown up together and shared similar backgrounds. They had all been involved in street life from an early age, but they were frustrated by their lack of opportunities in established gangs. They decided to create their own organization where merit was measured by violence rather than age or connections. Jay Boogie was one of the founding members, bringing the Harris family's reputation and connections to the group. His involvement gave Bloodhound immediate credibility and access to weapons, drugs, and territory that other new gangs couldn't obtain. The gang's name itself reflected their approach. They would hunt their enemies like bloodhounds, relentlessly tracking them down until they were eliminated. This wasn't just a catchy name, it was a philosophy that guided all of their operations. From the beginning, Bloodhound operated differently than other gangs. While most crews focused on drug dealing with violence as a side business, Bloodhound made violence their primary business. They would take contracts, settle disputes for money, and eliminate problems for other criminal organizations. The gang's structure was deliberately loose but effective. There were no formal ranks or elaborate hierarchies like in traditional gangs. Respect was earned through action, and action meant violence. The more bodies you caught, the more respect you earned. It was a simple system that attracted the most dangerous young men in Chicago. Bloodhound's territory was initially small but strategically located. They controlled several blocks that served as major drug trafficking routes, giving them leverage over larger gangs that needed to move product through their area. This geographic advantage allowed them to punch above their weight in gang politics. The gang's reputation for extreme violence spread quickly through Chicago's criminal community. Other crews learned that conflicts with Bloodhound wouldn't be resolved through negotiation or compromise. They would be settled through bloodshed. This reputation served as both a deterrent and a recruitment tool. When Jeff was ready to join, it wasn't really a question of whether he would be accepted. The Harris name guaranteed his entry, and Jay Boogie's sponsorship ensured he would be given opportunities to prove himself quickly. Jeff's initiation into Bloodhound wasn't some ceremonial ritual. It was practical. He had to participate in an operation that would demonstrate his commitment and capability. The gang needed to know that the youngest Harris brother was worthy of the family name and the Bloodhound reputation. Jeff's transition from disappointed basketball player to active gang member happened quickly and decisively. Once he made the decision to fully embrace the street life his family had prepared him for, there was no gradual adjustment period. He jumped in with both feet, eager to prove himself worthy of the Harris name and the Bloodhound reputation. His first role in Bloodhound was as a lookout and messenger, positions that might seem minor but were actually crucial training. Jeff learned how to read situations, identify threats, and communicate under pressure. These skills would serve him well as his responsibilities increased and the stakes got higher. Jeff's natural intelligence and his family's training made him exceptionally good at these early roles. He could spot police surveillance from blocks away, identify rival gang members in crowds, and relay complex information accurately under stress. His reliability in these positions earned him respect from older gang members. The gang's operations during this period were relatively small-scale but consistent. They were building their reputation through persistent violence rather than spectacular attacks. Jeff participated in beatings, intimidation campaigns, and small-scale robberies. Each successful operation built his confidence and his standing within the group. Jeff's first taste of real violence came during a dispute with a rival crew over drug territory. The conflict had been simmering for weeks, with both sides engaging in increasingly aggressive posturing. When shooting finally broke out, Jeff was ready and eager to participate. His performance during this first shootout impressed everyone involved. While other young gang members might have panicked or hesitated, Jeff remained calm and focused. He followed orders, maintained his position, and showed no fear even when bullets were flying around him. Jeff's parents watched his progress with obvious pride. They would ask him about his activities, offer advice based on their own criminal experience, and celebrate his successes. Other parents might have been horrified to learn their son was involved in violent crime. The Harris family treated it like Jeff was succeeding in school. His mother was particularly supportive, often giving Jeff money for weapons and equipment. She would also provide alibis when needed, lying to police about Jeff's whereabouts during investigations. Her support wasn't passive. She was an active participant in Jeff's criminal career. Jeff's father took a more hands-off approach, but his approval was clear and meaningful. He would introduce Jeff to other street figures as "my boy who's making moves." This kind of endorsement from a respected figure like Jeff's father opened doors and created opportunities that other young criminals couldn't access. The family support system allowed Jeff to take risks that other young gang members couldn't afford. He knew that if something went wrong, his family would protect him with money, connections, and alibis. This safety net made him bolder and more aggressive than his peers. Jeff's rapid advancement within Bloodhound was also due to his willingness to volunteer for dangerous assignments. While other members might hesitate when asked to participate in high-risk operations, Jeff always stepped forward. This eagerness to embrace danger impressed his superiors and accelerated his rise through the gang's informal hierarchy. As Jeff proved himself reliable in smaller operations, Bloodhound began giving him more responsibility and independence. His next step up was drug dealing, which required a different skill set than simple violence. Jeff had to learn how to manage inventory, handle money, and deal with customers while staying alert for police and rivals. Jeff approached drug dealing with the same intensity and intelligence he brought to everything else. He wasn't content to be a small-time corner dealer making pocket change. He wanted to build a real operation that would generate serious money and respect. His family connections helped him access better suppliers and more lucrative territories. The drug trade in Chicago during this period was incredibly violent and competitive. Dealers had to be ready to defend their territory at any moment, and Jeff's growing reputation for violence actually helped his business. Customers knew not to try to rob him, and competitors knew challenging him meant risking their lives. Jeff's approach to drug dealing was systematic and professional. He studied successful dealers, learned from their methods, and improved on their techniques. He understood that consistent quality and reliable service were just as important as the ability to defend territory through violence. His success in drug dealing wasn't just about making money. It was about proving he could handle complex operations that required planning, organization, and leadership skills. Jeff demonstrated all of these abilities while maintaining the ruthless edge that made him dangerous. Jeff's drug operation grew rapidly, expanding from a single corner to multiple locations across several blocks. He recruited younger kids to work for him, teaching them the same lessons his family had taught him about loyalty, violence, and respect. His family continued to support his activities enthusiastically. His mother helped him launder money through legitimate businesses, while his father provided strategic advice based on his own experience in the drug trade. They treated Jeff's drug dealing like a legitimate family business, discussing strategies and celebrating profits. The money Jeff made from drug dealing allowed him to upgrade his lifestyle and his equipment. He bought better weapons, nicer clothes, and a car that enhanced his reputation. But more importantly, the money gave him independence and the ability to fund his own operations. Jeff's success also attracted attention from law enforcement. Police began investigating his activities, but Jeff's family connections and street smarts helped him avoid serious consequences. He learned how to operate under surveillance and how to insulate himself from direct involvement in the most dangerous activities. But Jeff was already getting restless with drug dealing. While it was profitable and had enhanced his reputation, it wasn't exciting enough for someone with his appetite for violence and risk. He began looking for opportunities to combine his business activities with his love of conflict and confrontation. The transition from drug dealer to robber wasn't a big leap for Jeff. He had the skills, the connections, and the family support to take on bigger risks for bigger rewards. More importantly, robbery offered the kind of immediate violence and excitement that drug dealing couldn't provide. Jeff's move into robbery marked a significant escalation in his criminal career and his reputation for ruthlessness. While drug dealing required patience and business skills, robbery was pure violence and intimidation. It was also much more dangerous, with higher stakes and more immediate consequences for failure. Jeff didn't start with random street robberies that might target innocent civilians. He was smarter than that, focusing on other criminals, drug dealers, gang members, and anyone else who couldn't go to the police. This approach was more profitable and strategically sound, but it also created enemies who would remember his face and hold grudges. His robbery operations were carefully planned and professionally executed. Jeff would spend weeks studying potential targets, learning their routines, identifying their vulnerabilities, and planning escape routes. This methodical approach minimized risk while maximizing profits. Jeff's first major robbery targeted a mid-level drug dealer who operated outside of Bloodhound territory. The operation was a complete success. Jeff and his crew got away with several $1,000s in cash and a significant amount of drugs. More importantly, the robbery enhanced Jeff's reputation for being both smart and dangerous. Word of Jeff's robbery skills spread quickly through Chicago's criminal community. Other criminals began approaching him with information about potential targets, hoping to partner with him on operations. Jeff was selective about these partnerships, choosing only the most profitable and strategically advantageous opportunities. His most significant and controversial robbery operation targeted Trap City, a crew that had been Bloodhound's allies in several previous conflicts. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. Jeff planned it carefully, studying their operations and identifying their vulnerabilities over several months. The decision to rob Trap City was controversial, even within Bloodhound. Some members argued that betraying allies would damage the gang's reputation and create unnecessary enemies. But Jeff convinced the leadership that the potential profits outweighed the risks, and that Trap City's weakness made them vulnerable to other crews anyway. The Trap City robbery was Jeff's most ambitious operation to date. The target was a major drug stash house that contained both money and product worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Jeff assembled a crew of Bloodhound's most trusted members and spent weeks planning every detail of the operation. The robbery itself was executed flawlessly. Jeff's crew overwhelmed the guards, secured the location, and escaped with everything of value before police or rival gang members could respond. The operation netted more money than any previous Bloodhound operation and established Jeff as one of the gang's most valuable members. But the long-term consequences of the Trap City robbery were severe and far-reaching. The betrayal destroyed the alliance between Bloodhound and Trap City, creating a new enemy and sparking a gang war that would claim multiple lives over the following months. Jeff's family supported the robbery despite its consequences. They saw it as evidence that Jeff was thinking big and taking the kind of risks that separated real players from wannabes. The fact that it created new enemies didn't concern them. It just meant more opportunities to prove their son's capabilities in violent conflict. The gang war that followed the Trap City robbery gave Jeff numerous opportunities to demonstrate his skills in violence and strategic thinking. He participated in multiple shootings, always with his family's encouragement and support. Each successful operation increased his reputation and his confidence. Jeff's first murder wasn't a random act of violence or a moment of passion. It was a calculated execution that demonstrated his complete transformation from disappointed teenager to cold-blooded killer. The victim was a member of a rival crew who had been marked for death as part of the ongoing gang war with Trap City. The planning for the murder took weeks and involved multiple Bloodhound members. Jeff studied his target's movements, identified the best location for the attack, and prepared multiple escape routes. This wasn't the work of an impulsive young man. It was the methodical approach of someone who had been trained for this moment his entire life. Jeff's target was a mid-level Trap City member who had been involved in retaliatory attacks against Bloodhound. The decision to kill him was both strategic and personal. His death would send a message to Trap City while also satisfying Jeff's desire for revenge. The murder took place on a quiet residential street where the victim felt safe. Jeff approached on foot, wearing dark clothing and a mask to avoid identification. When he was close enough, he drew his weapon and fired multiple shots, ensuring the target was dead before fleeing the scene. When Jeff finally pulled the trigger, he felt no hesitation or remorse. Years of family conditioning had prepared him for this moment perfectly. The victim's death wasn't a tragedy to Jeff. It was an achievement, proof that he had finally become what his family always wanted him to be. The immediate aftermath of the murder revealed everything about the Harris family's values and priorities. Instead of being horrified or concerned about their son becoming a killer, they celebrated. Jeff's mother hugged him and told him how proud she was. His father shook his hand and welcomed him to the ranks of real killers. J Boogie's reaction was particularly telling and significant for Jeff's future development. He didn't just congratulate Jeff, he began planning their next operation together. The murder wasn't an endpoint for the family, it was a beginning. Jeff had proven he could kill, and now they wanted to see how many more bodies he could catch. The family's celebration of Jeff's first murder wasn't private or subdued. They talked about it openly, treating it like any other family milestone. Jeff's mother would brag to her friends about her son's accomplishments. His father would introduce him to other criminals as someone who had proven himself in the most definitive way possible. This public celebration of murder showed how completely the Harris family had rejected normal moral boundaries. They weren't just tolerating Jeff's violence, they were proud of it, encouraging it, and using it to enhance their own reputations in the criminal community. The murder also marked Jeff's full acceptance into Bloodhound's inner circle. He was no longer a junior member learning the ropes. He was a proven killer who could be trusted with the gang's most sensitive operations. This new status came with increased responsibilities and opportunities. Jeff's first murder also had practical consequences for his criminal career. Word of the killing spread quickly through Chicago's gang community, enhancing both his personal reputation and Bloodhound's collective standing. Other crews began to take them more seriously as a threat. The success of his first murder gave Jeff confidence and a taste for killing that would drive his future actions. He had discovered that he was good at murder, and that it brought him the respect and recognition he craved. This realization would shape the rest of his short life. After his first murder, Jeff began using social media to document and celebrate his crimes in ways that shocked even Chicago's hardened criminal community. This wasn't just teenage bragging or seeking attention. It was a deliberate strategy to build his reputation and intimidate his enemies through digital psychological warfare. Jeff would go live on Instagram and Facebook shortly after committing murders, describing what he had done and how he had done it. These weren't vague hints or coded messages designed to avoid legal consequences. They were detailed confessions that left no doubt about his involvement. He treated murder like a performance art, with social media as his stage. His approach to social media was sophisticated and calculated. Jeff understood that in the modern street game, perception was as important as reality. By documenting his crimes online, he was creating a permanent record of his capabilities that would enhance his reputation long after the immediate impact of each murder had faded. Jeff's social media presence served multiple purposes simultaneously. It intimidated enemies, impressed potential allies, and satisfied his own need for recognition and respect. He was building a brand around his violence, turning murder into a form of entertainment for his followers. His family not only tolerated this behavior but actively encouraged it. They understood that Jeff's online presence was building the Harris family brand and enhancing their collective reputation in the criminal community. Every murder he documented online increased their influence and opened new opportunities. Jeff's mother was particularly active in supporting his social media activities. She would like and comment on his posts, often adding her own messages of pride and encouragement. Her public support for her son's murders showed the world that the entire Harris family stood behind his actions. The text messages between Jeff and his mother became legendary in Chicago's street circles and provided insight into the family's twisted dynamics. After one particularly brazen shooting that took place outside her house, she texted him expressing how proud she felt that her son's name was ringing in the streets. These messages, which Jeff proudly shared online, showed a mother celebrating her son's transformation into a killer. She wasn't concerned about his safety or the legal consequences of his actions. She was proud that he was living up to the family's criminal legacy. Jeff's social media presence also served a practical purpose in his criminal activities. By documenting his crimes, he was sending a message to potential enemies that he was fearless and willing to face consequences. This psychological warfare was as effective as actual violence in maintaining his reputation. The family's support for Jeff's online activities revealed their complete embrace of his criminal identity. They weren't trying to hide or minimize his actions. They were helping him broadcast them to the world. They wanted everyone to know what their son was capable of. Jeff's digital confessions also demonstrated his complete lack of fear regarding law enforcement. He was essentially daring police to arrest him, confident that his family's connections and his own street smarts would protect him from serious consequences. The online documentation of his crimes created a permanent record that would eventually be used against him. But Jeff didn't care about future consequences. He was focused on building his reputation in the present, regardless of the long-term costs. As Jeff's reputation grew beyond Chicago's borders, he began receiving offers to work in other cities where his skills were in demand. Milwaukee drug dealers and gang members had heard about his capabilities and were willing to pay premium prices for his services. This marked Jeff's evolution from local gang member to professional killer. The Milwaukee operations represented a significant step up in both complexity and profitability. These weren't personal beefs or territory disputes driven by emotion. They were business transactions where Jeff was being hired to solve problems for people who could afford to pay for permanent solutions. Jeff's first Milwaukee contract came through connections his father had established during his own criminal career. A drug dealer in Milwaukee was having problems with people who owed him money, and traditional collection methods weren't working. He needed someone with Jeff's reputation to send a message that would ensure future payments. Jeff accepted the contract and began planning the operation with the same methodical approach he used for his Chicago activities. He traveled to Milwaukee, studied the targets, learned their routines, and identified the optimal time and location for the attack. His family saw these paid hits as evidence of Jeff's success and the Harris family's growing influence. He was no longer just representing their name in Chicago, he was taking their reputation national. The fact that people in other cities were willing to pay for his services proved that he had achieved something special. Jeff's approach to the Milwaukee hits was professional and efficient. He would travel to the city, complete his assignment, and return to Chicago before anyone could connect him to the crime. These operations required careful planning and precise execution, skills that Jeff had developed through years of family training and street experience. The most famous of Jeff's Milwaukee operations was a triple murder commissioned by a local rapper who was also a drug dealer. The rapper had people who owed him significant money, and he wanted to make an example that would ensure future compliance with his business arrangements. Jeff accepted the contract and began planning what would become one of his most notorious operations. When Jeff executed the triple murder, it was with the same cold efficiency he had developed in Chicago. 3 people died in a matter of minutes, and Jeff disappeared before police arrived. The operation was so clean and professional that it enhanced his reputation throughout the Midwest. The success of the Milwaukee operations brought Jeff significant money and respect, but it also increased the risks he faced. Law enforcement agencies in multiple cities were now investigating his activities, and rival criminals were beginning to see him as a threat that needed to be eliminated. Jeff's family continued to support his Milwaukee activities, seeing them as proof that their son had achieved the kind of success they had always envisioned. They weren't concerned about the increased risks. They were proud that Jeff was operating at such a high level. Jeff's final operation wasn't in Milwaukee as many people assumed. It was back home in Chicago, where his criminal career had begun. In 2024, Jeff was attempting what would be his last hit when everything went wrong. Whether it was bad intelligence, improved security by his targets, or just bad luck, Jeff walked into a situation he couldn't control. The details of Jeff's final moments reveal both his skills and his limitations as a killer. He had successfully approached the target location and was in position to complete his mission when he was discovered by security. Instead of retreating and trying again later, Jeff chose to fight, demonstrating the fearlessness his family had instilled in him. The gunfight that followed was brief but intense. Jeff managed to wound several of his attackers, proving that even in his final moments, he remained dangerous and capable. But he was outnumbered and outgunned, and his luck finally ran out on the streets that had made him famous. Jeff's death in Chicago was particularly significant because it happened in the city where he had built his reputation. He died on the same streets where he had committed his first murder, where he had learned to be a killer, and where his family had shaped him into the monster he became. When news of Jeff's death reached his family, their reaction was immediate and telling. Instead of grief or regret, they expressed pride in how he had died. To them, Jeff hadn't failed. He had died like a warrior, fighting to the end against overwhelming odds. The circumstances of Jeff's death also revealed the inevitable consequences of the lifestyle his family had chosen for him. He died young, violently, and far from achieving any of the legitimate success he might have found through basketball or other positive pursuits. Jeff's death sent shockwaves through Chicago's criminal community. He had been seen as nearly invincible, someone who could handle any situation through violence and cunning. His death proved that even the most dangerous killers were mortal and vulnerable. The location of Jeff's death, back in Chicago rather than Milwaukee, was symbolic. Despite his success in other cities, he was ultimately a product of Chicago's streets, and those streets claimed him in the end. The Harris family's response to Jeff's death was unlike anything seen in Chicago's street culture. While most families mourn their lost children and call for an end to violence, the Harris family doubled down on their celebration of Jeff's criminal career and the circumstances of his death. Jeff's father became particularly active on social media, posting multiple messages that glorified his son's life and death. He shared photos of Jeff with weapons, recounted stories of his murders, and promised that the family's war against their enemies would continue even without Jeff. His most infamous post came shortly after Jeff's death when he wrote something along the lines of, "Y'all didn't get him, he came to get y'all, and what happened happened, the saga continues." This message revealed everything about the family's twisted values and their complete disconnection from normal human emotions. Jeff's father's posts also revealed his pride in what he saw as Jeff's warrior's death. Instead of mourning the loss of his son's potential or regretting the choices that led to this outcome, he was bragging about an unsuccessful drill and seemed genuinely proud of the way Jeff had gone out. His mother's response was equally disturbing and revealing. She posted messages about how proud she was of the man Jeff had become and how his name would live forever in the streets. She treated his death like the conclusion of a successful career rather than a tragedy that had destroyed their family. The family's public celebration of Jeff's death sent shockwaves through Chicago's criminal community. Even in a culture that often glorifies violence, the Harris family's response was seen as extreme and inappropriate. They weren't just accepting their son's death, they were celebrating it as the perfect ending to his story. J Boogie's response was more subdued but equally telling. He posted messages promising to continue his brother's work and ensure that Jeff's enemies would pay for his death. The family wasn't planning to retreat or seek peace, they were planning revenge and continuation of the cycle of violence. The family's response also revealed their complete investment in Jeff's criminal identity. They had spent years building him into a killer, and they weren't going to let his death diminish that achievement. To them, Jeff had died exactly as he should have, violently and without compromise. This reaction showed that the Harris family's corruption went beyond simply enabling Jeff's crimes. They had become so invested in his criminal success that they couldn't imagine any other outcome for his life. His death wasn't a failure to them. It was the inevitable and appropriate conclusion to the story they had written for him. The family's continued glorification of Jeff's violence, even after his death, demonstrated that they had learned nothing from the tragedy they had created. Instead of recognizing their role in destroying their son's life, they were using his death to enhance their own reputations and continue the cycle of violence. The story of Bloodhound Lil Jeff and the Harris family represents something unique and disturbing in the annals of American crime. This wasn't a case of a good family losing a child to the streets despite their best efforts. This was a case of a family systematically creating a monster and then celebrating that monster's reign of terror until his inevitable violent death. Jeff's transformation from a basketball-loving teenager to a cold-blooded killer didn't happen despite his family's influence. It happened because of it. Every step of his criminal evolution was supported, encouraged, and celebrated by the people who should have been protecting him from that life and guiding him towards something better. The Harris family's approach to raising Jeff reveals a complete inversion of normal parental values and responsibilities. Where most parents try to instill empathy and compassion, they taught ruthlessness and violence. Where most parents discourage criminal behavior, they demanded it. Where most parents hope their children will be better than they were, the Harris family ensured Jeff would be worse. Jeff's story also demonstrates the devastating power of family influence in shaping criminal behavior. He didn't become a killer because of peer pressure, environmental factors, or personal choices made in isolation. He became a killer because his family trained him to be one from childhood, systematically eliminating every other possibility for his life. The family's celebration of Jeff's crimes and death shows how completely they had embraced criminal values over human values. They weren't conflicted about their son's choices, they were proud of them. They didn't see his violence as a problem to be solved. They saw it as an achievement to be celebrated and a legacy to be continued. Jeff's legacy in Chicago's streets is exactly what his family wanted it to be. He's remembered as one of the most feared killers of his generation, someone who never showed mercy and never backed down from violence. To the Harris family, this reputation represents their greatest achievement as parents. The family's response to Jeff's death proves that they view his story as a success rather than a tragedy. They created exactly the kind of son they wanted. A killer who would enhance their reputation and carry on their criminal legacy. The fact that this choice ultimately cost Jeff his life doesn't seem to concern them. Jeff's story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of evil and the role of family in creating or preventing it. Evil isn't always something that emerges despite good influences. Sometimes it's something that's deliberately cultivated by people who should know better. The Harris family's systematic creation of a killer represents one of the most disturbing examples of parental failure in modern American crime. They didn't just fail to prevent their son from becoming a criminal, they actively worked to ensure he would become the most dangerous criminal possible. The story of Bloodhound Lil Jeff and the Harris family forces us to confront the devastating consequences of completely abandoning moral boundaries in favor of criminal success. Jeff's death at 21 years old was the inevitable conclusion of a life that had been shaped by violence from the very beginning. Jeff died exactly as his family had prepared him to die. Violently, young, and without the possibility of redemption or change. He never had the opportunity to become anything other than what his family made him because they had systematically eliminated every other path his life could have taken. The family's response to his death proves that they learned nothing from the tragedy they had created. Instead of recognizing their role in destroying their son's life and potential, they celebrated his death as the successful conclusion of their criminal project. The Harris family's story serves as a warning about the power of family influence and the consequences of choosing criminal values over human values. They created a monster, unleashed that monster on the world, and then celebrated when the monster was finally destroyed by the same violence they had taught him to embrace. Jeff's story didn't have to end this way. With different parents, different values, and different choices, he could have been the NBA player he once dreamed of becoming. Instead, he became exactly what his family wanted him to be, a killer who died young and violent, leaving behind only a legacy of fear and destruction. The true tragedy of Bloodhound Lil Jeff isn't just that he died at 21. The true tragedy is that he never had a chance to be anything other than what his family made him. From the day he was born, his fate was sealed by people who confused love with corruption and success with violence. In the end, the Harris family got exactly what they wanted. A son who would be remembered in the streets forever. They just had to sacrifice his life, his future, and his soul to get it. And based on their response to his death, they consider that a fair trade. The saga continues, as Jeff's father promised. But it's not a saga of triumph or success. It's a saga of a family that chose evil and paid the ultimate price for that choice. Jeff's death wasn't the end of their story, but it was the inevitable conclusion of the path they chose for him from the beginning.
Lil Yoshi is the man who tried to kill NBA Youngboy, and I'm gonna show you exactly how he tried to do it. Right now in a Louisiana prison cell doing 15 years of hard labor, there's a man named Miyoshi Edwards. The streets know him as Lit Yoshi. And out of everybody who ever stepped to Kentrell Garden, out of everybody who ever wanted that smoke with the biggest rapper Baton Rouge ever produced, this is the one who got the closest. This is the one prosecutors say put a phone in his hand on the same street as Youngboy the night a man died. This is the one who federal agents say left his DNA on the guns. This is Youngboy's biggest op, no cap. And the wild part is, the law had this man dead to rights more times than I can count, and they still couldn't keep him off the streets. Let me break it down for you real quick so you understand what kind of dude we talking about. 4 people shot at a convenience store, 7 attempted murder charges, a drive-by that put 2 adults and 2 kids in the hospital on the 4th of July, a man who got arrested, bailed out within a week and celebrated by dropping a music video called First Day Out, where he basically rapped his own confession, a man who was so confident the system couldn't touch him that he kept recording songs about killing his ops while he was literally on house arrest for killing his ops. And here's where it gets crazy. Every single time the courts let him go, he went right back to the streets and slid again. For real. He'd catch a body case, bond out, and be back on Instagram laughing about it days later. But the heart of this whole story, the reason Lit Yoshi's name is going to live forever in the books of Baton Rouge gang history, comes down to one thing. Prosecutors got to stand in front of a jury and tell them that this man was tied to the shootout in Miami that almost ended NBA Youngboy's life. The same shootout where an innocent man, a rental car worker just leaving his job, got caught in the crossfire and lost his life. Yoshi never got charged for that one. He never got convicted of that one. But the judge ruled the jury could hear about it anyway, because the state said it all connected back to one war, one feud, one body count that started in 2017 and never stopped. So who is this man? Why did he want Youngboy gone so bad that he'd shoot up gas stations and apartment complexes and damn near catch a kid in the process? What did Youngboy do to TBG that made Lit Yoshi appoint himself the executioner of a whole gang war? And how does a man with 7 attempted murder charges keep walking out of jail like it's a revolving door? That's the real tea I'm finna give you. We gotta go all the way back to the beginning, back before the bodies, back when these dudes were actually friends. Because to understand how Lit Yoshi became NBA Youngboy's biggest op, you gotta understand the war he was fighting for. And trust me, gang, this one gets darker than anything you thought you knew. Now before we rewind, let me set the stage so you know why this is bigger than just 2 rappers throwing shots on Instagram. NBA Youngboy ain't just some local rapper. By the time Lit Yoshi was actively trying to take him off the earth, Youngboy was one of the biggest artists in the entire country. We talking billions of streams. We talking #1 albums. We talking a man whose YouTube numbers were competing with Drake and everybody else at the top of the game. Kentrell Golden turned Baton Rouge pain into a global empire, and he did most of it while he was on house arrest, in and out of jail, dealing with his own legal situations. That's the level we operating on here. So when I tell you that Lit Yoshi, a man from the same city, made it his personal mission to end all of that, to put a real bullet in one of the most famous young artists alive, you gotta understand how serious that is. This wasn't internet beef. This wasn't subliminal disses and quote tweets. This was a man who, according to court documents and his own lyrics, was treating NBA YoungBoy and everybody affiliated with him like targets in a real war. And he wasn't doing it for clout, even though the clout came. He was doing it because in his mind, he was avenging the dead. Here's the part that makes this whole thing a tragedy and not just a story. The conflict between NBA and TBG, Never Broke Again versus Top Boy Gorilla, didn't just claim the lives of so-called gangsters. It claimed the life of an innocent man in Miami who never asked to be a part of any of it. It put 2 children in the hospital on a holiday. It turned a city that was already struggling into a place where rappers were getting gunned down in their own apartment parking lots. The feud didn't just take 1 or 2 lives. By the time the dust settled, you could count the bodies on both sides, and most of them were young men barely out of their teens. And Lit Yoshi sat right in the center of all of it. He wasn't the founder of TBG. He wasn't even the most famous rapper in his own crew. That title belonged to Fredo Bang, but the streets and the police both came to the same conclusion about Yoshi. He was the shooter, he was the enforcer. Prosecutors literally called him a TBG enforcer in open court and named him a suspect in multiple murders before he ever caught the charges that put him away. Now you might be asking, why Lit Yoshi? YoungBoy had a lot of ops. There were a lot of people in that war, a lot of names, a lot of shooters on both sides. So what makes Yoshi the biggest one? It comes down to 3 things. Number 1, the closeness to death. Out of everybody, Yoshi's name is the one tied directly to the shooting that nearly killed YoungBoy himself in Miami, the one where prosecutors said his phone pinged on the same street. Nobody else got that close on the record. Number 2, the body of evidence. This wasn't just talk. Yoshi was tied to shooting after shooting. 4 people here, a family there, his DNA on the guns, his own lyrics confessing it. The man left a trail. And number 3, the relentlessness. Yoshi never stopped. Even after arrest, even on house arrest, even staying down decades in prison, he kept sliding, kept rapping about it, kept going after YoungBoy's people. Most ops fall back when the heat comes. Yoshi pressed harder. That combination, the closest call, the heaviest evidence, and the refusal to ever quit, is what makes him stand alone. That's why when people talk about who NBA YoungBoy's biggest op really was, the answer keeps coming back to one name. To understand how one young man from Baton Rouge ended up with that kind of reputation, and how he became the #1 threat to the biggest op in his life, we gotta go back to where it all started. We gotta go back to a time when the men in this story were on the same side. Let's rewind to Baton Rouge in the mid-2010s. Back then, the south side of the city had 2 crews coming out the same area, the same struggle, the same blocks. You had TBG, Top Boy Gorilla, claiming the top side of South Baton Rouge, and you had BBG, Bottom Boy Gorilla, claiming the bottom side. These dudes came up around each other. A lot of them knew each other since they were kids. And the rapper who was about to change the whole game, Kentrell Golden, NBA YoungBoy, came out of that same environment with his Never Broke Again movement. Let me explain the layout because the geography matters in this story. South Baton Rouge had its lines drawn before any of these rappers got famous. TBG repped the top side, BBG repped the bottom side, and these weren't just rap labels. Law enforcement described all of these groups as gangs, with real territory, real history, and real beef that went back years before the music money showed up. NBA Never Broke Again was YoungBoy's thing, and over time NBA and BBG ended up working together against TBG. So when you hear NBA versus TBG, understand it's really a whole alliance of crews on one side against another. All of it rooted in neighborhoods that were at odds long before a single diss track dropped. The rap just put a national spotlight on a war that was already happening in those streets. That's why this could never just stay on wax. The beef was real, the people were real, and the guns were real. Now Baton Rouge in those years was producing serious talent. You had a whole generation of young dudes who could actually rap, who had real bars, who could have all eaten together if the circumstances were different. Instead, that talent got tangled up in the same trauma in the same blocks they were rapping about. NBA Youngboy was the one who broke all the way through to superstardom, but he came up alongside these other artists in the same studios around the same people. That closeness is exactly what made the war so personal. These weren't strangers from different cities throwing shots. These were men who knew each other, who'd been in the same rooms, who had history. And when that history curdled into hatred, it produced the kind of violence that only comes from people who used to be close. Here's something a lot of people don't know, and it's important because it explains the whole betrayal angle. NBA Youngboy and the man who became the face of TBG were close. The face of TBG was a rapper named Garrett Burton, known to the world as G Money or that real G Money. Youngboy and G Money were like brothers in the beginning. Youngboy used to call G Money his big bro. They were collaborating, supporting each other. Two of the brightest young talents Baton Rouge had produced in years, both trying to rap their way out the same trenches. Now, to really understand this, you gotta know that in these neighborhoods, loyalty is everything. So when that friendship fell apart, it didn't fall apart quiet. It fell apart in the worst way possible. The details of what split them up have been told 100 different ways, but here's what the public record and the people involved have said. According to G Money's own interviews, he felt like Youngboy got the big head once the success started coming. Youngboy was blowing up, getting national attention, and G Money felt like his old friend switched up on him, but it went further than just hurt feelings over fame. According to reporting and statements that came out later, the real fracture came when G Money put out a song with lyrics that disrespected Youngboy's sister, and in an interview, G Money reportedly bragged about being involved with her. That's the kind of disrespect that in this culture you don't take back. That's the kind of thing that turns a friendship into a war overnight. Youngboy responded on social media that disses started flying back and forth, and from that moment the clock was ticking. But here's where it gets crazy. The first body in this war wasn't G Money. According to whispers that circulated for years and later came out in the open, the first move was against the NBA side. Youngboy's manager and close friend, a man named Desmond Hardnett, known as Dump, was shot and killed in 2018. Dump wasn't just a manager. He was family to Youngboy, somebody close, somebody trusted. And the street narrative that built up over the years was that Dump's killing was tied directly into this beef. Some even alleged Dump had played a role in what happened to G Money. That's the thing about gang wars. Every shooting becomes the reason for the next one. Nobody can ever agree on who started it because everybody believes they're getting revenge for something that came before. Now let me put G Money's death on the table because this is the spark that lit the fuse for everything Lit Yoshi did. On September 10th, 2017, just after 1 in the morning, G Money was leaving a recording studio on Dallas Drive in Baton Rouge. As he walked out to that parking lot, somebody opened fire on him. He was pronounced dead right there at the scene. He was 22 years old. The police didn't treat it as random for 1 second. They immediately started investigating it as a targeted hit connected to the rap feud that had been simmering in the city. And for almost 2 years, it stayed open. No arrest, just speculation and pain. Then in June 2019, the arrest came. Authorities charged a man named DeAndre Fields, an associate of NBA Youngboy who rapped under the name NBA Lil Pap, with the murder of G Money. When that arrest hit, it confirmed for TBG everything they already believed. To them, this wasn't just some unsolved case anymore. This was proof. The man they said pulled the trigger on G Money came from the NBA side. And remember that name, NBA Lil Pop DeAndre Fields, because he's gonna come back into the story in a major way when Lit Yoshi steps onto the scene. Because the way Yoshi saw it, that was an open debt. That was blood that had to be answered. And it wasn't just G Money. A few months after his death, in November 2018, another TBG affiliated rapper named Boulevard Quick was shot and killed. Authorities investigated whether he was targeted because of his connection to G Money in the same ongoing feud. So now you got TBG looking at two of their own in the ground, G Money and Boulevard Quick, and a manager from the other side, Dump, also dead. The bodies were stacking up, the funerals were happening, and the music kept getting more violent. Both camps started putting their dead homies' names in their lyrics, turning grief into ammunition. This is the environment Lit Yoshi rose up in, not a peaceful one. A city that was already at war, already counting losses, already past the point of no return. This is important because Lit Yoshi didn't start this conflict, he inherited it. By the time he made his name, The lines were already drawn in blood. G Money was gone. Baller It Quick was gone. And TBG needed somebody to carry that weight, somebody willing to do what the rappers behind the microphone wouldn't always do themselves. They needed a soldier, and that's exactly the role Lit Yoshi stepped into. This is where things started getting deadly. Now let's talk about who Lit Yoshi actually was in these streets, because this is where it gets real. Yoshi wasn't somebody who just stumbled into the gang life through rap. According to street reporting, he came from it. It's been said that Yoshi was the nephew of a notorious early TBG figure who got killed back in the 2000s, which means this man was around the life before he ever picked up a microphone. So when Fredo Bang, TBG's biggest star, started running into his own legal problems, it was Lit Yoshi who stepped up to carry the gang on his back and, in his own words and the words of the people around him, avenge his fallen partners. And the way Yoshi did it was different from everybody else. See, a lot of rappers talk crazy on songs and then live regular lives. Yoshi was the opposite. The police, prosecutors, and even his own ops came to believe that this man was actually doing the things he rapped about. The district attorney's office would later describe him in open court as a TBG enforcer and say publicly that he was a suspect in numerous murders before he ever caught the charges that took him down. Think about that. Before any of the cases we're about to break down even happened, this man already had that kind of reputation with law enforcement. That's not clout. That's a target on your back from every direction. Let me walk you through how Yoshi's name started getting attached to real violence, because this is the escalation chain that leads all the way to the war with Youngboy. According to documents that came out in court later, Lit Yoshi was connected to a shooting in February 2019 at a house associated with BBG members on the 3000 block of Crestwood Street. BBG, remember, was the crew that worked alongside NBA in the rivalry against TBG. And BBG was the set that Youngboy's own cousin had famously repped heavily back before Youngboy blew up. So even this early, Yoshi's alleged actions were aimed squarely at the people closest to NBA Youngboy. Then it escalated. On April 10th, 2019, police secured a crime scene on a stretch of Highland Road in Baton Rouge. At first, the cops tried to keep the details quiet, but court documents would later reveal something serious. Lit Yoshi was accused of performing a drive-by on that street, with a shooter firing an assault rifle at a group of people outside a convenience store. 4 people got hit. 4. And here's where it gets crazy. Even after this, Yoshi stayed free. He didn't get arrested. He kept moving. That's the pattern that's going to define this entire story. This man would do something that should have put him behind bars for life, and somehow he'd still be walking around, still dropping music, still sliding. About a month after that quadruple shooting, Yoshi's name got tied to the biggest one of all, the Miami shootout targeting NBA Youngboy. We're going to get into the full details of that in a minute because that's the main event, but for now, just understand the timeline. In a matter of months in 2019, Lit Yoshi went from being a TBG rapper to being a man that prosecutors connected to a shooting that put 4 people on the ground, and then to a man they alleged was tied to an attempt on the life of one of the biggest rappers in the world. That's a fast, brutal rise. And here's the part that should have never happened. After all of that, Yoshi was still walking free. Think about the timeline for a second. February 2019, the BBG house gets shot up. April 2019, his name gets tied to the Miami shooting on Youngboy. Then around May 2019, his name gets tied to the Miami shooting on Youngboy. 3 serious incidents in a matter of months, and the man is still on the streets, still making music, still untouched. In September 2019, 4 months after the Miami shooting, Yoshi was on a song called Blasting, rapping all about hitting people with bullets so hard they think they were getting hit with 722s. That's not a man hiding from the law. That's a man taunting it. He stayed free through almost all of 2019 while the bodies and the shootings he was connected to kept piling up. It wasn't until December 2019, all the way at the end of that brutal year, that authorities finally moved on the April quadruple shooting and brought him in. And even then, like I told you, he was right back out within a week. The system kept handing this man chances he used to do nothing but cause more harm. Now let me tell you about the music. Because Yoshi's lyrics are a huge part of why this man went to prison. Most artists, when they're under investigation, they shut up. They lay low. Not Yoshi. He appeared on a song with fellow TBG affiliate Seven Hardaway, where he shocked fans with a lyric so wild it became infamous. He rapped that he was evil and that he'd step on Jesus. On that same track, Hardaway took direct shots at Youngboy, referencing that Miami shootout, rapping that they might kill him at rehearsal so he'd never make his show. These weren't subliminals. These were direct threats set to a beat put out for the world to hear. In December 2019, the law finally caught up to one piece of it. Yoshi got arrested in connection to that April 2019 quadruple shooting on Highland Road. Detectives revealed that a 762 cartridge was found at the scene, and that one of the victims of the drive-by identified Yoshi as the shooter. With that, Miyoshi Edwards got charged with 4 counts of attempted murder. And ballistics took it even further. Police said the same gun used in the April drive-by was also used in that February 2019 shooting at the BBG house on Crestwood. So now you got one weapon tying together multiple attacks on the people connected to Youngboy. The case was building. But this is where the Baton Rouge justice system enters the chat and does something that, to this day, makes no sense to a lot of people. Despite the apparent danger Lil Yoshi posed, despite the DA literally calling him an enforcer and a murder suspect, within a week of the public finding out about his arrest, Yoshi got bailed out. Just like that. And how did he celebrate getting out on 4 attempted murder charges? He dropped a music video. The song was called First Day Out. Now you gotta understand how brazen this video was. It opens with a menacing intro pulled from a YouTube documentary where a computer voice lists off the exact charges Yoshi was arrested for. Then it cuts to a real shot of him walking out of the same jail NBA Youngboy had walked out of so many times before. And the song itself? It's Yoshi taunting his ops with lyrics so incriminating that fans were losing their minds in the comments. He rapped about still having the same Glock that made somebody drop. He rapped about still getting a drop on the ops and spinning their blocks. The fans clowned him relentlessly, joking that his lawyer must have had a heart attack listening to it, calling it self-snitching, but Yoshi didn't care. The man was facing 4 attempted murder charges and using his freedom to record songs that sounded like confessions. That tells you everything about his mindset. He wasn't trying to beat the system quietly, he was daring it. And while Yoshi was finessing his way out of jail and dropping these songs, the war in the streets didn't pause for 1 second. In March 2020, an NBA-affiliated man named Travis Parker, known as T-Baby or T-Main, somebody close to the NBA camp, was shot and killed in his own home, and an older woman believed to be his mother was wounded but survived. People on the NBA side mourned him hard. Then exactly a week later, the tables turned. On March 29th, 2020, a man was found shot dead in front of a food mart in Baton Rouge. Police identified him as Jason Nixon, and a gun violence memorial site confirmed he was a TBG affiliate who went by Dutch. Dutch was older, respected, somebody who could be seen hanging around TBG artists like Fredo Bang, Lit Yoshi, and Boulevard Sleepy. He even appeared in the video for Yoshi's First Day Out. TBG turned out in force at his funeral, and right on cue, the NBA side started clowning his death online, while TBG posted tributes. Let me show you how that grief war played out, because it tells you everything about how cold this whole thing had gotten. Seven Hardaway, a close friend of Dutch, mourned him by posting a photo on his Instagram story paired with the song War Baby by Roddy Ricch, a track all about the trauma of growing up in the zone where you gotta slide on the people who slide on you. A few months later, Hardaway took it further and released a song called Pain, where he reminisced about all his fallen friends, Dutch included. That's how TBG processed loss. They turned it into music and used it as fuel for the next round. Meanwhile, over on the NBA side, there was no mourning. Baby Joe made an Instagram story straight up making fun of TBG members for being hurt over Dutch's death. No respect, no pause, just more disrespect poured onto an open wound. That's the temperature of this war by the time Lit Yoshi was at the center of it. One body, then a week later another body, then everybody fighting about it on Instagram before the next one dropped. And understand, Yoshi wasn't a background figure in this. The reason his name kept coming up in connection to the worst of it is because he built that reputation on purpose. He wanted Baton Rouge to know exactly how savage he was. He put it in his lyrics, he put it in his videos, he put it on his lives. While other dudes used rap as a way out the streets, Yoshi used it as a megaphone to announce that he was still in them, still active, still a problem. That's a rare and dangerous kind of person, somebody who's not trying to leave the life behind, who's not even trying to hide it, but who's broadcasting it to the world while the police are watching and writing every word down. This is the chaos Lit Yoshi was living in and feeding at the same time. And it was about to get even more personal because Yoshi was about to start a feud with the exact man he was accused of shooting. Now we get to the heart of it. The reason this video is titled the way it is. The reason Lit Yoshi earned the title of NBA Youngboy's biggest op, because out of everybody in this war, Yoshi is the one whose name got tied directly to the night somebody tried to kill Kentrell Gaulden. Let's set the scene. It's the Mother's Day weekend, May 2019, in Miami, Florida. NBA Youngboy was there with his entourage, his people, the mother of one of his children among them. They were outside a Miami hotel when gunmen opened fire on the group. This wasn't a random robbery. According to authorities, this was a targeted attack. Somebody came to that hotel to kill NBA Youngboy. The members of Youngboy's entourage who were legally armed returned fire, and a gun battle erupted right there in the open. Youngboy himself survived. His girlfriend got shot in the shoulder but lived. But the tragedy is that a man who had nothing to do with any of it got caught in that crossfire. A worker for the rental car company, leaving his job, just trying to go home, was struck and killed. An innocent man dead because of a war between rappers that he never had anything to do with. For a long time, nobody knew exactly who was behind that Miami shooting, but the investigation kept circling back to TBG and to one man in particular. According to prosecutors, phone records from the time of the shooting placed Lit Yoshi's approximate cell phone location on the same street as that Miami hotel, the same street where Youngboy was attacked and the bystander died. And it got worse for Yoshi. Prosecutors alleged that during the time of that shooting, he was on the phone with an incarcerated TBG member, somebody locked up while he was right there at the location. There was even later reporting that the feds had a recording from a wiretap, a prison call between Yoshi and another TBG member discussing the Youngboy shooting. Now let me be clear about something, because this matters. Lit Yoshi was never charged with that Miami shooting. He was never convicted of it. He was never arrested for it. To this day, no court ever found him guilty of trying to kill NBA Youngboy in Miami. What I'm telling you is what prosecutors alleged and what came out in court filings, but here's the thing that makes this the main event of the whole story. A judge ruled that even though Yoshi wasn't charged for Miami, the jury in his Baton Rouge attempted murder trial would be allowed to hear about his alleged involvement in it. The state argued that all of these shootings were part of one common theme, one ongoing feud between NBA and TBG, and that the Miami attack on Youngboy fit right into the pattern. So the man who tried to beat his Baton Rouge charges was now facing the possibility of a jury hearing that he was connected to an attempt on the most famous rapper from his city. That's how serious the state was about tying Lit Yoshi to NBA Youngboy. And I don't ever want to move past that innocent man too fast, because in all the talk about rappers and gangs and clout, he's the one who matters most and gets remembered least. He was a worker at a rental car company. He clocked out, he was leaving his job, probably thinking about going home to his family, and he walked straight into the middle of a war he had nothing to do with. He didn't pick a side, he didn't rap, he didn't bang. He just happened to be in the wrong parking lot at the wrong second while grown men settled a beef for bullets. And he lost his entire life for it. Every time these wars play out, it's people like him who pay the bill. The bystanders, the families, the kids in the backseat. That's the real cost. And no diss track, no #1 album, no street reputation is worth a single one of them. But Miami wasn't even the only time Yoshi's name got connected to going after the people closest to Youngboy. Let me take you to April 6, 2020. Two masked men were caught on security camera footage shooting at somebody in the parking lot of an apartment complex in East Baton Rouge. The intended target was off camera, but the camera captured something horrifying. An innocent bystander sitting in their car got caught right in the crossfire. And one of those shooters, according to court documents, turned out to be Lit Yoshi. How did they connect him? Because Yoshi appeared in a social media post right after, alongside Seven Hardaway, wearing the exact same outfit from the surveillance footage, a black night deck hoodie and gray sweats. Hardaway matched the build of the second shooter. The post was them seemingly laughing about the shooting and tagging Fredo Bang, letting him know they were in a good mood after what they just done. Now here's the part that's truly insane, and it ties directly back to Youngboy's circle. One of the targets of that April 2020 shooting was later revealed to be NBA Lil Pap, DeAndre Fields, the same man who'd been charged with murdering G Money. So Yoshi, according to court documents, was allegedly trying to kill the exact man accused of starting this whole thing by killing his TBG partner. That's the revenge motive playing out in real time. And the other target, a man named Mishi Baby, who was also connected to the NBA camp. And this is where Yoshi's own mouth got him in trouble worse than any gun ever could. A month before that April shooting, Lit Yoshi and NBA Michi Baby had gone back and forth on social media. It had come out that Michi might have been a target of one of Yoshi's earlier shootings and was potentially going to testify. Yoshi and Fredo Bang posted an image to Instagram that appeared to show a letter Michi received from authorities informing him he was formally listed as a victim in a shooting case and needed to appear in court. Now, that letter didn't actually say Michi was cooperating. It looked like the feds simply identified him as somebody who'd been shot at and were hoping he'd show up and testify. Michi himself got on Instagram and said, yeah, he got a letter from the cops, but he had no intention of taking the stand, and the letter wasn't even addressed to him personally. He admitted Yoshi shot at him, said the cops took him to jail, and then sent that letter and basically told everybody to stop playing with him. But Yoshi wouldn't let it go. He kept mocking Michi online, tagging him directly, telling him not to come to court, calling him an informant just for receiving that letter. He posted that there was no evidence on him and that the only reason he was being taken to court was because of Michi's statement. He suggested Michi did it to get off his own probation. He was loud, he was relentless, and he was publicly calling the victim of his alleged shooting a snitch. And the back and forth got ugly and detailed because Michi didn't just sit there and take it. Michi got on Instagram and broke the whole thing down himself. He told everybody the paperwork was right there on Instagram for people to read, and that folks were stupid for thinking it meant he made a statement. He said the cops pulled up on him, took him to jail at night, and then sent a piece of paper to his house, a letter that wasn't even addressed to him by name. He admitted plain as day that Yoshi shot at him and said the letter from the police came after all that, not because he was cooperating. He told Yoshi to stop playing with him, but Yoshi flipped it, posting that the paper proved Michi said something, that the only reason there was even a court date was because Michi was a victim who gave a statement and that the state had nothing on him otherwise. Yoshi pushed the theory that Michi made a deal to swap him out and get off his own probation, saying you catch a gun on probation, you're looking at years, so Michi supposedly traded Yoshi's freedom for his own. Michi kept denying he was a snitch, called Yoshi out for being thirsty for attention, and even clapped back at Fredo Bang with paperwork of his own that he claimed showed Fredo giving information to the police. So now you got both sides waving paperwork at each other, both sides calling the other a rat, the whole thing playing out live for thousands of people to watch. And the wild part is, all of this public arguing about who shot who and who told on who was being read, screenshotted, and saved by the exact people building the case against Lit Yoshi. Every word was evidence. Then a few weeks later, in that April 6th shooting, court documents say Yoshi tried to kill that same man. Read that again? He publicly called Michi a snitch for being a victim, and then he allegedly tried to murder him, which prosecutors later argued was an attempt to take out the witness against him so he could beat his case. The problem is, in doing so, he just put himself on the hook for another crime. And calling a shooting victim a snitch in public, that's basically admitting you did the shooting in the first place. Yoshi was building the state's case for them with his own hands, and the man still didn't slow down. 10 days after that April shooting, Yoshi got on Instagram Live and accused NBA members of snitching on him, saying he refused to go to jail, complaining that everybody was acting like he was beefing with people he wasn't. He was rapping about bodies, getting on live, talking reckless, all while these cases were piling up. This man treated the most serious charges a person can face like they were a joke. Then came the one that should have ended any sympathy anybody had left. July 4th, 2020, the 4th of July, a holiday, police responded to a drive-by shooting on the 1130 block of Greenwell Springs Road. The target was a car, and inside that car were 2 adults and 2 children. All 4 passengers ended up in the hospital with injuries that thank God weren't life-threatening. But think about that for 1 second, a drive-by on a family with 2 kids in the car on the 4th of July. This is the level of recklessness we're talking about. And this time, the police finally got the breakthrough they needed. They linked the rental car used in both the April and the July 2020 shootings to Lit Yoshi's girlfriend, who had rented it in her real name. That was the thread that unraveled everything. With that connection, Yoshi became the subject of a search warrant. Cops found an assault rifle in his car that matched the ballistics from the crime scene. They found a pair of shoes at his apartment that matched the ones worn by one of the shooters in the April incident. The one caught on camera. The evidence was no longer circumstantial. It was physical. It was direct. Yoshi's arrest made the local news, with reporters explaining that surveillance video linked Mayoshi Edwards to the Greenwell Springs shooting where 2 children and 2 adults were hit, and that when police took him in, They realized he also had an active arrest warrant for the April shooting. By July 9, 2020, Lit Yoshi was charged with 7 counts of attempted first-degree murder, among other charges. 7. And what did the Baton Rouge judiciary do with a man facing 7 attempted murder charges, including a drive-by on children? They gave him bail again. Just a day later, a bond got set at $1.16 million, ironically by the same judge who had given NBA YoungBoy chance after chance in his own attempted murder case years before. Eventually, another judge stepped in and put a hold on him. All of Yoshi's shooting cases got combined and handed to yet another judge, who set a combined bond of $1.82 million. But even that still gave him the option to bond out, and he took it. His family put up the money, and the arrangement allowed him to go on house arrest in another state, Florida, where he'd still be allowed to make music. The only real restriction was that he couldn't post on social media. He filed a not guilty plea on August 3rd, 2020, told the court he was moving to Florida, and just like that, the man accused of shooting up a family on the 4th of July was living in a plush South Florida home. That's the system that was supposed to protect Baton Rouge from Lit Yoshi. And even with Yoshi exiled to Florida on house arrest, the war he was fighting for didn't slow down. If anything, it got louder, because while their main shooter was gone, NBA YoungBoy and Fredo Bang, the biggest stars on each side, kept the smoke alive on social media all through 2020. On July 20th, they both posted videos showing they were outside riding around Fredo driving through what looked like Baton Rouge with his TPG posse, including 7 Hardaway, telling the camera his ops weren't even in their own hood. YoungBoy fired back with his own video, telling the ops they'd have to catch him if they wanted to assassinate him, bragging about being rich and moving too fast to be touched. The following month, in August 2020, it escalated into something that genuinely felt like a chess move in a war. Fredo was teasing his upcoming album, In the Name of G, a tribute to G Money, and word got out he was eyeing a September 11th release date. Problem was, that was the same day YoungBoy planned to drop his project Top. Fredo posted that it looked like they'd both be dropping the same day and called YoungBoy his son. YoungBoy did not take that lightly. He came back with a furious video rant, telling Fredo he was gonna catch him and shoot him, telling Fredo he's not a killer, even saying Fredo should go dig up all 3 of his dead friends. A brutal reference to G Money, Boulevard Quick, and Dutch. He said he wasn't in competition with Fredo, that Fredo just wanted to copy everything he did, and got so heated he started saying wild things about smashing Fredo's girls, even his mother. Fredo replied much calmer, telling viewers to go help YoungBoy with his anger issues. Then dissed YoungBoy's late friend Dump by making fun of his weight and saying he needed an extra large coffin. He also mocked an NBA member who had reportedly become paralyzed after being shot in 2019. A fact that was apparently a closely guarded secret in the NBA camp. This is the level the war was on. 2 of the biggest rappers in the South openly threatened each other and disrespecting the dead while their soldiers were in jail or in the ground. That's the environment Lit Yoshi created and left behind when he went to Florida. And the bodies kept coming. In November 2020, there were back-to-back shootings. On November 20th, Baton Rouge police responded to a shooting at a gas station on Airline Highway where 2 people were shot, 1 surviving and 1 passing away. It's unclear if that one was tied to the feud, but what happened the next day absolutely was. On November 21st, 2020, at a Quick Mart gas station, police reported a shooting where the victim returned fire and survived. Over the following days, hip-hop media reported that the man who got shot was a prominent NBA member, Big B, who took a bullet to the leg. Big B started appearing on social media showing off his injuries and his mobility aids, even posting a picture supposedly at the gas station pump where he was found. After the shooting, rumors swirled that the person who shot Big B was now dead, and one wild fan theory claimed the revenge attack happened all the way in Houston, but that turned out to be false. The Houston incident people pointed to actually happened hours before Big B was even shot, and was unrelated. Big B himself later came out and denied killing anybody who shot him. Still, the incident made its way into the music. Big B later rapped about not having time to aim but still shooting back, and YoungBoy rapped about his brother getting shot multiple times and not dying. In this war, every shooting became a lyric, and every lyric kept the war going. Then a few weeks after Big B got shot, in December 2020, 7 Hardaway came out with a diss track called Treason, aimed squarely at NBA and YoungBoy himself. Hardaway opened the song talking about YoungBoy's early days, how TBG used to coach him back when he was still friendly with them. He expressed disappointment about YoungBoy's beef with Floyd Mayweather and Jay Prince, called him out for hiding when TBG shooters came around, and dissed his use of auto-tune and his street credibility. It was personal, it was layered, and it was just one more log on the fire that had been burning since 2017. All of this, the album date war, the Big B shooting, the diss tracks, was happening while Lit Yoshi sat in Miami filming vlogs and acting like the walls weren't closing in. But they were, and the way he spent that time on house arrest is exactly what sealed his fate. So now Lit Yoshi is in Florida on house arrest, and you'd think a man facing 7 attempted murder charges would keep his head down and pray. Not Yoshi. He started a YouTube channel and began posting vlogs documenting his life on house arrest. Let me tell you what was in these videos, because they're a huge part of why this man is in prison right now. In the vlogs, Yoshi openly shouted out his gang. He talked about spending big money on his case. He told the world that house arrest wasn't stopping anything. He'd walk around his house rapping the most violent lyrics from artists like King Von and Lil Durk, songs about funerals and shootings while preparing to go to court. Let me paint the picture of these vlogs for you, because the energy in them is wild given the circumstances. Here's a man facing 7 attempted murder charges, and in his videos he's relaxed, cocky, treating the whole situation like a minor inconvenience. He talk about how he been good for 3 months, how staying in the house didn't fit him because he liked to move around, how he expected nothing but good news when he went to court. He talked about getting out on bail like it was already a done deal, saying it felt good to ride around again, saying he felt like a free man already and all the judge had to do was put the icing on the cake. He shouted out his gang, talked about putting big money behind his case, and flat out told the world that house arrest wasn't stopping a thing. This is somebody who genuinely believed the money and the lawyers had him untouchable. And honestly, given how many times the Baton Rouge courts had already let him slide, you could understand why he thought that. He'd been bailing out of attempted murder charges for over a year at this point. From where he was sitting, the system was a joke he kept winning. He had no idea how close he was to the end of the road. He told viewers he'd been on his best behavior for 3 months and was confident the judge was about to give him even more freedom. He talked about feeling like a free man already, saying all he needed was for the judge to put the icing on the cake. That confidence turned out to be misplaced. At a hearing in November 2020, the judge actually went off on Yoshi for having too much fun on bail. The court said he was treating his house arrest like a paid vacation. The DA complained that Yoshi was out here violating curfew, moving around Miami late at night on jet skis, relaxing on the beach, making music with his friends, living it up while he was supposed to be confined. As punishment, the judge moved his curfew up, starting at 6 p.m. instead of 8 p.m., and specifically banned him from jet skis and from glitzy Miami spots like Biscayne Bay and South Beach. In his own vlog after that hearing, you could see a stressed out Yoshi for the first time admitting they almost kept him locked up, that prosecutors had actually tried to revoke his bond completely. His TBG partner, Seven Hardaway, tried to spin it positive, saying it wasn't a problem because they had the money and could put up another $2 million if they had to. That's the mindset. They thought money could finesse anything. For a minute, getting humbled in that courtroom seemed to scare Yoshi straight, but it didn't last. Soon that confidence came right back, probably because the money was still flowing, and Yoshi kept doing the one thing guaranteed to bury him, making music that incriminated himself. In a song called Get Back from late December 2020, he shows zero signs of giving up the violent lifestyle, rapping about dead ops and taunting his enemies. In Bust Down for February 2021, he rapped about friends who did him wrong during house arrest, bragged about still making money while confined, and threatened to put a $10,000 bounty on somebody's head. Then in a song called Together from July 2021, he took it to a whole new level, rapping that his ops were gonna die together, describing pulling up next to their car, saying he didn't care if they were with their families when he caught them. He rapped these words while on house arrest for shootings that included a drive-by on a car with 2 children in it. The man could not stop confessing on beat. Meanwhile, the case against him kept tightening. 20 days after that song about putting money on people's heads, the judge in his case delivered a devastating blow. The court ruled the jury would be allowed to hear evidence about his alleged involvement in the Miami hotel shooting that targeted YoungBoy in 2019. And the revelations that came with that ruling were disaster for Yoshi's defense. The phone records placing him on the same street as the hotel, the alleged call to an incarcerated TBG member during the shooting, and on top of that, prosecutors said they could use his own Instagram lives against him, the ones where he publicly claimed NBA members had ratted on him in the drive-by case. The man's social media presence, the same thing he used to flex and taunt, had become a stockpile of evidence for the prosecution. Then the whole thing came crashing down. On July 22nd, 2021, Lit Yoshi was staying at the house of his TBG label mate Fredo Bang when federal agents burst in. We talking smoke bombs, assault rifles, tactical gear, the full federal raid. The cops had outstanding warrants in Baton Rouge for both Fredo Bang and Lit Yoshi, and they arrested them both. This came from probation violations. The terms of Yoshi's release said he wasn't allowed to appear in music videos, post on social media, or possess firearms. Fredo Bang was on probation too from a guilty plea on a weapons charge tied to a 2015 shooting. And here's the killer: during that raid, agents found guns inside Fredo's home, along with a stolen car parked outside. 5 guns, ammunition, and a bulletproof vest, all found while Yoshi was there. For a man banned from being anywhere near firearms, that was catastrophic. Let me put the irony of this in perspective, because it's almost poetic how it played out. Lit Yoshi spent years being the untouchable one. He was the shooter who walked, the enforcer the cops named in open court but couldn't hold, the man who turned every arrest into a first day out video. He had the money, the lawyers, the bond payments, the South Florida house. He thought he cracked the code. And in the end, what brought him down wasn't some dramatic shootout or a star witness on the stand. It was the basic terms of his own release. He wasn't supposed to be around guns. He wasn't supposed to be in music videos. He wasn't supposed to be posted on social media. He did all 3 brazenly on camera for months. The man beat the streets for years and then got taken down by the fine print of his own bail agreement. That's what happens when you start believing your own hype. You get careless about the small things, and the small things are what get you. And then came the nail in the coffin. When his lawyers tried one last time to get him back out on bond, prosecutors dropped a DNA bomb. The FBI crime lab found Yoshi's DNA on multiple guns recovered from that Florida home. Not one gun, multiple. That evidence tied him directly to weapons connected to the shootings he was already being investigated for. There was no spinning that. His own defense team quietly withdrew the bond motion because they knew what it meant. The finesse was over. The money couldn't buy his way past his own DNA sitting on a federal evidence table. From that point forward, Lit Yoshi was going to answer for everything he'd been dodging for years. Just days after the raid, authorities announced they were adding another attempted murder charge to Yoshi's case. That April 2020 shooting where he allegedly tried to kill NBA Lil Pap and NBA Michi Baby. The month after he publicly called Michi a snitch, his bond got officially revoked by a Baton Rouge judge on September 9th, 2021. The federal agents who ran the raid testified about all those guns, the ammunition, the vest, and his March 2020 social media post calling shooting victim Michi a snitch got used against him too. Because like I said, publicly calling a victim a snitch is basically confessing you did the crime. Even with all of that, Yoshi's team was still trying to finesse him out on bail one more time. But that plan died completely when it came out in court that Yoshi's DNA was found on a gun recovered in the July raid. The East Baton Rouge district attorney said the FBI crime lab found Edwards' DNA on multiple guns in that Florida home. That DNA evidence linked Yoshi directly to the weapons connected to the shootings he was being investigated for. Once that came out, his lawyers withdrew the motion to reinstate his bond. There would be no more bailing out. No more jet skis, no more Miami beaches. Lit Yoshi was going to sit behind bars and await his trial. Now here's how it ended in court. On the eve of his trial, facing 9 counts of attempted first-degree murder, looking at the real possibility of a life sentence if a jury convicted him, Lit Yoshi took a deal. On July 14th, 2022, Mayoshi Tyree Edwards pleaded guilty. He copped to a count of attempted first-degree murder, a count of assault by drive-by shooting, and a count of aggravated assault with a firearm connected to 2 shootings, the 2019 incident and the 4th of July 2020 drive-by. In exchange, he was sentenced to 15 years in prison with hard labor, followed by 3 years of active supervised parole. The structure of it had him serving that time back to back with 10 years to be served without parole, probation, or suspension. A man who'd been finessing the system for years finally ran out of road. But Yoshi being Yoshi, he didn't go quiet. About a month after the sentencing, he claimed he'd been tricked. He launched a bid to withdraw his guilty plea and take his chances at trial. His argument? He said his lawyer never told him he'd actually get 15 years for taking the plea. He thought he was agreeing to something closer to 6.5 years, expecting to serve about 65% of a shorter sentence with time served counted. His new attorneys made a wild claim on top of that. They said his previous lawyer, a prominent attorney, had been suspended from practicing law during part of the time he represented Yoshi, and that Yoshi only found out by reading about it in the newspaper. That lawyer disputed the accusations, saying he believed Yoshi could have shaved real time off the sentence as a first-time offender, and denied misleading his client. It was a long shot, and it failed at every level. The 19th Judicial District Court rejected it. The First Circuit Court of Appeal rejected it, denying his request in February 2023. And in May 2023, the Louisiana Supreme Court, the highest court in the state, unanimously shut it down without comment. 2 words: writ application denied. Lit Yoshi was set to serve the full 15 years of hard labor off the streets of Baton Rouge and Miami. And honestly, given what the record shows about the danger he posed to innocent men, women, and children who kept getting caught in his crossfire, the city was a little bit safer the day those courthouse doors closed on him for good. But while the courts were finally locking Lit Yoshi away, the war he'd been fighting didn't end. The blood kept flowing, and the next loss would hit TBG harder than anything Yoshi could have imagined from behind bars. While Lit Yoshi was sitting in prison watching his appeals get denied one by one, his TBG family kept the war going on the outside. Seven Hardaway, Yoshi's close partner, the one who rapped alongside him, the one who tried to spin his bond hearings positive, the one who matched the build of the second shooter in that April surveillance footage, kept up in the ante. In August 2022, Hardaway dropped an EP called Transition, where he took shot after shot at NBA Youngboy, NBA, and 4KT. On a song called Sinister, he dissed Youngboy, rapping that while Youngboy's albums were going #1, his friends back in Baton Rouge were getting killed. NBA's Big B clapped back online, commenting who died, basically saying nobody on their side had been touched recently. The following month, somebody did lose their life, but it wasn't an NBA member. On the night of Tuesday, September 20th, 2022, around 8 p.m., Seven Hardaway, whose real name was Stanley Wright, was in the parking lot of the Sherwood Place apartment complex in Baton Rouge, the building where he lived. Unknown assailants approached him and shot him from close range, leaving him on the pavement where he lost his life. He was laid to rest days later, surrounded by TBG members. Police quickly determined the homicide was gang-related and specifically targeted Seven for his TBG affiliations and his connection to Lit Yoshi. And just like clockwork, TBG's enemies got on social media to celebrate, with 4KT affiliates seen on Instagram Live laughing and saying they were smoking on number 7. His own friends made posts hinting at future getback, and to this day, the Baton Rouge police have struggled to find his killer, another unsolved homicide in a gang war that has produced too many of them. That's the thing I need you to understand about this whole story. There are no winners here. Not one. NBA Youngboy survived, became a global superstar, sold millions of records, but he did it carrying the weight of a war that took people close to him and put a target on his back that he'll probably never fully escape. Lit Yoshi made his name as the most feared shooter in his city, the enforcer, the man who got closer to ending Youngboy than anybody. And what did he get him? 15 years of hard labor, a cell, and a legacy as a man the courts say was a danger to society. G Money is dead, Boulevard Quick is dead, Seven Hardaway is dead, Dump is dead, T-Baby is dead, Dutch is dead, an innocent rental car worker in Miami is dead, 2 children in a car on the 4th of July got shot. And for what? A feud that started over disrespect and never knew when to stop. And here's a bigger lesson that goes way past Baton Rouge, something the whole rap game should have learned by now. Lit Yoshi didn't just get convicted off witnesses and ballistics. He got buried by his own music and his own social media. Prosecutors used his Instagram lives where he called victims snitches. They were ready to use his lyrics, his videos, his vlogs. The first day out song that fans clowned as self-snitching, that wasn't a joke. That's the kind of thing that ends up in a courtroom. We living in an era where rappers' words are getting used against them in real cases across the whole country, where a verse can become an exhibit and a music video can become evidence. Yoshi is a textbook example of how that happens. He treated his art like a confession booth, broadcasting everything he was accused of doing, and the state just sat back and collected it all. Young artists watching this story need to understand that the camera you think is building your brand can be the same camera that builds the case that takes your freedom. There's also the harder truth about how the system handled him, because it cuts both ways. On one hand, the Baton Rouge courts let this man bond out over and over while he allegedly kept shooting people, which is its own kind of failure to the community. On the other hand, when they finally did get him, they got him hard. 15 years, no successful appeal, the highest court in the state slamming the door. Both of those things are true at once. A system that moves too slow and then comes down like a hammer doesn't actually keep anybody safe in between. The 4 people shot in 2019, the family with 2 kids shot in 2020, they paid the price for all the times the revolving door let Yoshi walk. That's the part nobody wants to sit with. Let me keep it 100 with you, because I don't want anybody walking away from this thinking there's something glamorous about how lit Yoshi lived. There isn't. This was a man who had real musical talent. Nobody can take that from him. But instead of using it to get out, he poured everything into continuing a war and shooting at his rivals. He showed no remorse for the innocent men, women, and children who got caught in the middle. He did a drive-by on a car with 2 kids inside. He allegedly tried to murder a shooting victim just to keep him off the witness stand. He rapped about killing his ops no matter who they were with. By any honest measure, Lit Yoshi was a danger to everybody around him, and the only debate is why it took the system so long to put him away. He bailed out over and over. He caught case after case and kept getting chances. That's not him being lucky. That's a justice system that failed Baton Rouge again and again until the evidence got so overwhelming that even his money couldn't finesse it. But I gotta be fair, because this story has 2 sides, and the other side ain't clean either. The NBA camp wasn't sitting around playing victim the whole time. An NBA associate got charged with murdering G Money. That's the spark that lit Yoshi's whole mission. NBA affiliates were celebrating deaths on Instagram Live just like TBG did, smoking on the names of the fallen, laughing at funerals. This was a war with shooters and casualties on both sides, and pretending one camp was righteous and the other was evil would be lying to you. The truth is uglier than that. The truth is a generation of young men from the same city who came up around each other, who could have built something together, instead spent years putting each other in the ground over pride, grief, and revenge that just kept feeding itself. So where does everybody stand today? NBA Youngboy is still one of the biggest artists in music, still releasing projects, still moving units like few rappers alive. DeAndre Fields, NBA Lil Pap, has faced his own legal battles tied to the G Money case. Fredo Bang, TBG's biggest star, has continued his career while dealing with his own legal situations. And Lit Yoshi, Miyoshi Edwards, sits in a Louisiana prison serving 15 years of hard labor. His appeals exhausted, his bid to take it all back denied by the highest court in the state. He'll be in his late 30s before he's even eligible to taste freedom, and out from under the system's reach when he's in his 40s, if he makes it that long. Because the war he was part of has shown it doesn't forget and it doesn't forgive. That's the real story of NBA Youngboy's biggest op. Not a glamorous gangster, not a legend. A young man from Baton Rouge who inherited a war he didn't start, appointed himself as executioner, came closer than anybody to taking out one of the biggest rappers in the world, and threw away his own life, his own talent, and his own freedom in the process, taking innocent people down with him along the way. Lit Yoshi wanted all of Baton Rouge to know how savage he was in the streets. Now the whole world knows, and he's going to spend the next decade and a half learning that in this life, the streets always collect what they're owed. Every single time. No cap. If you made it this far, you already know how I get down. Real research, real details, no glorifying, just the truth about how these wars actually play out and who actually pays the price. Hit that like button, subscribe, and let me know in the comments who you want me to break down next. Because trust me, gang, in Baton Rouge alone, there's 100 more stories just like this one. 100 more young men who had everything to live for and threw it all into a war that never had a winner. And I'm gonna keep telling every one of them, no cap, so nobody forgets how this really goes. Appreciate y'all. Peace.
The crash dummy rapper that threw away a $6 million deal to be in the streets. And that rapper is PGF Nuck, born Virgil Gibson out of Englewood, Chicago. A man who had a platinum certified record, 70 million global streams, a deal with Alamo Records, the same label that built Rod Wave and Lil Durk into superstars. Features from G Herbo, ESTG, Big 30, and his own cousin Polo G, one of the hottest rappers in the entire game. A man who charted on the Billboard Heatseekers. A man who went from selling candy on the block at 15 years old, making $600 a day, to having the entire music industry knocking on his door 2 decades later. A man who had every door in rap wide open. And then, on the night of April 7th, 2024, while he was already on pre-trial release for a felony machine gun possession charge, no cap, he was already in the system, already supposed to be keeping his nose clean. PGF Nuck allegedly put a pistol in a 32-year-old man's face at a gas station on the 5900 block of South Morgan Street and took his Chevy Malibu at gunpoint. Then, in that same stolen Malibu, he pulled up to another gas station at the 8300 block of South Cottage Grove, climbed into a 35-year-old man's 2022 Kia at gunpoint, forced that man into the passenger seat of his own car, and kidnapped him. 2 carjackings, 2 victims, 30 minutes, a federal indictment now staring him in the face with charges including 2 counts of carjacking, 3 counts of using a machine gun during the commission of a violent crime, interference with commerce by threat of violence, and kidnapping. Legal analysts say if convicted on all counts with consecutive sentencing, PGF Nuck is looking at a potential life sentence. Gone, finished, at 22 years old. This is what staying in the streets cost Virgil Gibson. And here's the part that makes this story so different from every other rapper to prison story you've ever heard. PGF Nuck was not broke. He was not struggling. He was not some artist who hadn't gotten his shot yet. He had already gotten the shot. He had already blown up. The Alamo Records deal was done. Wad Up, his breakout single, 3 words that cut through speakers from Chicago all the way to the coasts, had already gone platinum. Polo G, his cousin, one of the most celebrated rappers of his generation, had already jumped on the remix. The industry was in love with him. And sources close to the story point to him walking away from a deal that was reportedly in the range of $6 million, choosing instead to stay rooted in the kind of street activity that would ultimately land him in federal custody. For real, $6 million, gone. Not because someone robbed him, not because the label dropped him, because he chose the streets over the bag and the streets delivered him straight to federal prosecutors. This is not a redemption story. This is not a story about a rapper who fell on hard times. This is the story of a gifted artist who had every tool, every connection, every blessing that Chicago drill could hand a young man, and then watched it collapse in real time because he refused to leave behind the lifestyle that was always going to catch up with him. This is the story of PGF Nuck, the crash dummy rapper who had $6 million on the table and chose carjacking gas stations at midnight instead. Let me break it down for you. PGF Nuck was not some random dude off the corner who got famous overnight and didn't know how to handle it. His story is way more complicated than that, and that's why it hits so much harder. PGF stands for Psycho Gang Family. The name came from grief. A close friend of his who went by the name Psycho died young, and the whole crew took that name on in his honor. That's the foundation of who PGF Nuck is. A man who built his identity around loyalty, loss, and the streets of Englewood, one of Chicago's most historically tough neighborhoods. His actual name is Virgil Gibson. His mother gave him the nickname Nuck. She's the most important person in his life. He said it in interview after interview. She very important. She the most important thing in my life. I love my mama to death. She raised him with 7 siblings, instilling in him what he describes as an insatiable drive to go out and get it. Main lesson she taught me was to go experience life, go see what's out there. And he did exactly that. From age 15, Nuck was already out there hustling. Not drugs, not guns at that point, candy. He was pulling $600 a day selling candy as a teenager, which already tells you this was not a lazy kid. This was not somebody without ambition. This was somebody wired to grind. His mother always knew he was going to be a provider. The only question was what he was going to be providing and what it was going to cost him. He came up in Englewood surrounded by the architects of Chicago drill. He wasn't just inspired by these people from a distance. He knew them personally. He has spoken in interviews about knowing Lil Durk his whole life, about knowing G Herbo, about Chief Keef literally being at his house before he got on. These weren't idle name drops. These were his actual connections, his actual world. Chicago is a small city when you move through the right circles, and Nook moved through all of them. When he eventually got on, it wasn't an accident. It was the culmination of a kid who had been embedded in that culture his entire life. He started rapping at 17 at the urging of a close friend. When that friend died, he kept rapping to honor his memory. That's the DNA of PGF Nook's music. Every bar he spits carries the weight of real loss, real streets, real consequences. That authenticity is exactly what made What Up explode the way it did. And that same authenticity, that inability to separate himself from the life he raps about, is exactly what brought everything crashing down. The What Up event didn't just change his career trajectory. It changed what the entire industry thought was possible from a new Chicago drill voice. But here's what really went down to understand how Nook got from that moment to a federal indictment. We gotta go back to where this whole thing really started. Let's rewind to 2019. Back then, Virgil Gibson was a teenager from Englewood who had already lost people he loved, who had already seen what the streets could take from you, and who had just started posting music videos on YouTube. His first song ever recorded was called Hen Deuce. He was 16 or 17, going through real pain. He just lost 2 close friends. He was deep in the liquor. He rapped it out, posted the video on Facebook with the help of a friend who helped him film it. That video went viral on a local level. Within a month, it had 100,000 views. A month after that, 200,000. Then it kept climbing, picking up 100,000 new views a month organically, with zero label support, zero marketing budget, just raw energy and a voice that sounded like something people hadn't heard before. That was the first signal that this kid had something. But here's where it gets crazy. Even after that, Nook wasn't fully committed to music. He has said in interviews that he was too deep in the streets in those early years because the street money was too good. Making money the way he knew how to make it was too immediate, too real compared to the slow grind of building a music career. That tension between the streets that raised him and the music that could save him was always present. It was built into his story from day one, and it never fully resolved. He released music steadily through 2019 and 2020, building a loyal local following in Chicago. His output was aggressive, drill-forward, lyrically rooted in street life and loss. He made songs about real events, real people, real grief. He wasn't performing a character. He was narrating his actual life. For people in Englewood and on the South Side, that resonated on a level that mainstream rap couldn't touch. This was their world being put on record. The flow started to shift in 2021. He dropped Nads Be Bitches, his first track to crack 1 million views. That was a milestone moment. For a Chicago drill artist working independently, 1 million views meant the culture was paying attention beyond just your immediate neighborhood. Labels started to notice. The internet started to notice. The South Side of Chicago started to feel like it was about to have a new voice. But all of that was just the warm-up, because in October 2021, everything changed. October 26, 2021, PGF Nook drops What Up, and it was not a planned, calculated, industry-crafted rollout. The origin story of this song is almost impossible to believe, but it's real. Nook was at home, cooking bacon. He had a beat on in the background, a menacing drill beat produced by Fat Man Beats, the kind of percussion that hits like concrete. He started freestyling to it, letting the bars flow while he cooked. His girlfriend was watching. She knew that he had a habit of spitting good stuff and then forgetting it, so without telling him, she pulled out her phone and recorded him. He didn't know he was being recorded. She captured the whole freestyle in real time. When he heard it back, he knew. He put it out within a week. 3 little words formed the hook that would define his career. I, bitch, what up? Said with a kind of cold, casual menace that drill music hadn't heard quite like that. His delivery was what people called stuffy-nosed, a dry, almost nasal drawl that let every bar breathe, that created space in a genre that is usually wall-to-wall aggression. The Chicago Reader described it as terse verses in a wrought iron flow, lean percussion, a sparse synth melody as chilly as a dusty pipe organ. Critics and fans agreed this was not a standard drill track. Something about it was different. The song went viral immediately. 5 million views in its first 4 months. 70 million global streams total. On YouTube, on SoundCloud, in clubs across Chicago and then across the country, What Up was everywhere. Then something happened that took the whole thing to another level. In January 2022, just 3 months after the original dropped, Polo G posted a video of himself rapping along to What Up in his car. No cap, when Polo G posts your song while vibing in the car, the whole game pays attention. Polo G was at his commercial peak at this point. His song Rap Star had debuted at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. He was the biggest thing coming out of Chicago, arguably one of the biggest rappers, period. And he was publicly co-signing his younger cousin's drill record like it was the best thing he'd heard in months. The remix came together fast. On April 2nd, 2022, What Up featuring Polo G was released through Defiant Records. The remix became even bigger than the original, and now Nook wasn't just a Chicago name. He was a national name. Labels that had already been circling became aggressive. The industry wanted a piece of PGF Nook. He chose Alamo Records. This is important because Alamo is not some fly-by-night indie operation. This is the label that developed Rod Wave into a multi-platinum superstar. The label that had been home to Lil Durk, a man that Nook had known his whole life. Alamo, at this point backed by Sony Music Entertainment, was one of the most respected homes in hip-hop for exactly the kind of artist Nook was. Raw, authentic, street-rooted, with a real fan base. Signing to Alamo was a major endorsement of his potential. He dropped his debut studio album, Switch Music, on July 8, 2022. 16 tracks. Features from G Herbo, Polo G, ESTG, Big 30, heavy hitters across the board. The album hit #2 on the Billboard Heatseekers chart, which tracks emerging artists. PGF Nook was not a niche underground act anymore. He was a legitimate force in Chicago drill, and the industry was treating him accordingly. Around this time, his manager had already given him $5,000 to move out of Inglewood and set up a new life elsewhere. The label was behind him. The deal was structured. The money was flowing. Reports circulated that the full scope of his deal and future deals on the table could reach upward of $6 million when accounting for advances, royalties, and future project commitments. For a kid who was making $600 a day selling candy at 15, we're talking about life-changing, generational money. But here is where it starts getting complicated, because PGF Nook never fully left. He never made the clean break that his managers, his label, and his cousin Polo G could likely see was necessary for his survival. The streets had a hold on him that music money alone couldn't break. He has referenced this pull in his interviews, talking about how when he was deep in the streets in his early years, the money from that life made music feel less urgent. That same mindset, that same gravitational pull toward the life he grew up in never disappeared. It just went underground for a while, and then it came back with a vengeance. By 2023, the warning signs were already flashing. This is important because it's the part of the story that most people gloss over. Before the carjackings, before the federal indictment, before everything, PGF Nook had already been arrested in the summer of 2023. Chicago police pulled him over because the license plate on the car he was driving had been flagged for impound. The vehicle had previously eluded police during a stop. When officers approached, they found a firearm on the floorboard of the car. Not just any firearm, a switch. For those who don't know, a switch is a device that converts a semi-automatic pistol into a fully automatic weapon. In the state of Illinois, Governor J.B. Pritzker signed legislation in January 2023 explicitly banning switches and classifying possession as a felony carrying up to 10 years in prison. Under federal law, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives classifies a switch-equipped weapon as a machine gun outright. Now, here is where the story of Nook's character really starts to come into focus, because when the cops found the gun, Nook told them it belonged to his passenger. His passenger told the cops it belonged to Nook. Two people pointing at each other, sitting in a car with a converted machine gun on the floor. This was not the behavior of a man pivoting away from the streets. This was the behavior of a man still running the same playbook. He was charged with felony machine gun possession. He was released on pretrial bond, which means the court let him go home while the case was pending, with conditions. He was supposed to stay out of trouble. He was supposed to check in, follow the rules, stay clean. His music career was still active. His label was still behind him. He had every reason in the world to lay low and let the legal process play out quietly. He did not lay low. 10 months after that arrest, while on pretrial release for the machine gun case, he allegedly committed 2 carjackings in 30 minutes on the south side of Chicago. The same streets that made him. The same streets he never left. Fast forward to the night of April 7th, 2024. On April 7th, 2024, at approximately 11:47 p.m., in the 5900 block of South Morgan Street on Chicago's South Side, PGF Nuke, according to the Chicago Police Department, according to federal prosecutors, according to a grand jury that later handed down a formal indictment, put a pistol in a 32-year-old man's face at a gas station and took his vehicle, a Chevrolet Malibu, gunpoint. The victim had no choice. He handed over the car. Nuck drove away in the stolen Chevy Malibu. 28 minutes later, at approximately 12:15 a.m. on April 8th, he pulled up in that same stolen Chevy Malibu to a gas station in the 8300 block of South Cottage Grove Avenue. He spotted a 35-year-old man sitting in his 2022 Kia. He got out of the Malibu. He climbed into the Kia. With a firearm, he forced the driver out of the driver's seat and into the passenger seat of his own vehicle. He then drove that man, held hostage at gunpoint, through the streets of Chicago. That is not a carjacking. That is a kidnapping on top of a carjacking. That is a man committing multiple serious violent felonies on the same night within the same half hour using a weapon against innocent victims who were just at gas stations going about their lives. According to federal prosecutors, during this second incident, the victim was also forced to transfer money electronically, a detail that underscores just how calculated these acts were. This was not a crime of passion. This was not a desperate, impulsive moment. Multiple steps, multiple victims, multiple locations, multiple weapons uses, and then a money transfer demanded at gunpoint. Federal prosecutors would later use the calculated, repeated nature of these offenses as a primary justification for escalating the case from state court to federal court. Covert Chicago police officers later observed Gibson park the hijacked Kia in the 1600 block of West 55th Street and walk away from the scene. They tracked him. They found him hiding in the janitor's closet of a nearby phone store. That is where they arrested him, at 12:33 p.m. the following day. PGF Nuck, a rapper with a platinum single and a Billboard charting debut album, was pulled out of a janitor's closet in a phone store in Chicago. No cap, that is where the story of the streets took him. He was taken into custody by the Chicago Vehicular Hijacking Task Force. He was brought before Judge Charles Beach at the Layton Criminal Courthouse. The judge denied bail. Nuke was detained. The state charges were significant: 2 felony counts of aggravated vehicular hijacking with a firearm, 1 felony count of aggravated unlawful restraint, 1 felony count of armed aggravated kidnapping. But the state was just the beginning. 3 months after the initial state arrest on July 16, 2024, the United States Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Illinois dropped the real bomb. A federal grand jury had returned an indictment against Virgil Gibson. The federal charges were a different level entirely. 2 counts of carjacking, 3 counts of using a machine gun during the commission of a violent crime, 1 count of interference with commerce by threat of violence, 1 count of kidnapping. Let that sink in. 3 separate counts specifically for using a machine gun during violent crimes. That means prosecutors were treating the weapon used in these carjackings as a machine gun, which connects directly back to the switch that was found in his car during his 2023 arrest. The man was allegedly running around with a converted automatic weapon, committing carjackings and kidnappings, while on pretrial release for a prior machine gun charge. The federal government takes that kind of pattern very seriously. State charges are typically dropped when federal prosecutors step in and pursue the matter themselves. When the feds take your case, it means they believe the full weight of the federal justice system is warranted. It means sentencing guidelines are different, harsher, with less flexibility. It means mandatory minimum sentences start stacking up. And in this case, legal analysts who reviewed the indictment noted that if Virgil Gibson were convicted on all counts, and if those counts were sentenced consecutively rather than concurrently, he would be facing a potential life sentence. He was arraigned before U.S. District Judge Virginia M. Kendall on August 12, 2024. As of 2025, PGF Nuck remains in federal custody, awaiting trial. The case is still ongoing. All defendants are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. That's the law. But the evidence trail laid out by the federal indictment, the detailed accounting of locations, times, victims, and weapons, paints a picture that is hard to look away from. Here is what's wild about the timeline. While he has been sitting in federal custody, his music streaming numbers have surged. The controversy drove people back to his catalog. His YouTube views climbed. New fans who heard about the story started playing Wad Up for the first time, watching the music videos, discovering what he could do on a track. That platinum certified record, that debut album, that voice, none of it went anywhere. The talent is still right there, frozen in time while the man who made it sits in a federal holding facility waiting to learn his fate. Now, to really understand this, we gotta talk about the deeper structural reality of what happened to PGF Nook. Because this is not just a story about one man making bad choices. This is a story about the gravitational pull of environment and identity, and what happens when the music industry tells a young man from Inglewood that he's a star while his feet are still planted in the same streets that made him. Nook has spoken about this dynamic himself, though not directly in those terms. In his 2022 interview with DJ Booth's Audio Mac feature, he talked about how Chicago is simultaneously big and small. He talked about how his street connections and his music connections were the same connections, that the same people who were his hood connections became his industry connections once he got famous. That is not a metaphor. That is a structural reality of how Chicago drill works, and it is one of the most dangerous features of the genre's authenticity. In other great music scenes, there is some separation between the art and the street life it references. In Chicago drill, the authenticity is the product. The reason people believed Wad Up was because PGF Nook was not performing street life. He was living it and rapping about it in real time. That realness is what Polo G heard when he was vibing to it in his car. That realness is what label executives heard when they came with the deal, but that same realness, that inability to distinguish between being a rapper who talks about the streets and being a man who is still in the streets, is what federal prosecutors saw when they built their case. He told interviewers that he had been too deep in the streets in his early years because the street money was too good. He said that making money from the streets initially made rap feel less important. That is a man telling you plainly that for him, the streets and the money were always connected. When the music money came, it was supposed to replace the street money. But the mentality, the connections, the lifestyle, that was not replaced. That stayed exactly where it was. There is also a very specific Chicago dynamic that matters here. The city has lost an extraordinary number of its drill pioneers to gun violence, to incarceration, to early death. FBG Duck, referenced in PGF Nook's interviews, was gunned down in broad daylight on Michigan Avenue in 2020. Nook has spoken about Duck dying because he wouldn't leave the streets. He knew the lesson. He understood what staying in the streets cost. He watched it happen to people he knew, people he cared about, and still the pull was stronger. That is not a character flaw so simple as he's stupid or he's reckless. That is what addiction to an identity looks like. When your whole sense of self, your name, your crew, your music, your fan base, your legacy, is built on being from the streets and being authentic to those streets. Walking away from that life is not just a safety decision. It feels like a betrayal of everything you are. It feels like becoming someone else. For a lot of young men in Inglewood and across Chicago's South Side, that identity cost is higher than any dollar figure on a label contract. Which brings us back to the $6 million. Let's be real specific about what was actually on the table when PGF Nook had the music industry behind him, because people throw around big numbers without context, and it's important to understand what $6 million actually means in this situation. When Alamo Records, backed by Sony Music Entertainment, signed PGF Nook after Wad Up went platinum and Switch Music charted, they were not just signing a rapper. They were signing the next generation of Chicago drill with the cosign of Polo G, a track record of viral success, and 70 million global streams from a debut that was released with virtually no major label support. That is a compelling A&R package by any measure. The deal structure in major label hip-hop at this level for a new artist typically includes an upfront signing advance, recording fund advances for albums, and various performance and marketing commitments. When you add up the total potential value of a multi-album deal with a label like Alamo for an artist at Nook's trajectory, the reported figures around the $6 million range represent the full scope of what was available to him if he executed. That includes future album advances, tour support, brand deal opportunities that come with label backing, and the long-term royalty infrastructure that keeps paying even when you're not releasing music. For comparison, he was on pre-trial release when he allegedly committed those carjackings. The vehicles he allegedly stole were a Chevy Malibu and a 2022 Kia. The money the second victim was allegedly forced to transfer at gunpoint. That detail is in the federal indictment. In exchange for whatever was taken in those 30 minutes, PGF Nuck walked away from the most significant financial opportunity in his life and into a federal case that could result in a life sentence. That's some wild shit. There is no other way to say it. The math does not compute, the logic does not hold, and yet for anyone who understands what the streets do to a person's sense of reality and worth, it makes a terrible kind of sense. Because the streets don't care about your advance. The streets don't care about your Billboard chart position. The streets operate on their own economy, their own status system, their own code of loyalty and debt and obligation. And for Virgil Gibson, a 22-year-old from Inglewood who had never fully separated himself from that world, even as he was building a music career inside it, the pull of that street economy ultimately proved stronger than any number on a contract. The investigation into PGF Nuck's April 2024 crimes was swift and methodical. The Chicago Vehicular Hijacking Task Force, a specialized unit created specifically to address the city's carjacking epidemic, which had become a serious public safety crisis in Chicago, moved quickly after the two incidents were reported. The fact that covert officers were already watching when Gibson parked the hijacked Kia and walked away suggests that he may have already been on the radar before that night. He was arrested within 13 hours of the second carjacking. That speed reflects both the work of the task force and the strength of the evidence. Surveillance footage from 2 gas stations, victim descriptions, the Kia he left on the street, his own presence at the scene. He was found hiding in a janitor's closet. That detail matters not just as a dramatic visual moment, but because hiding suggests consciousness of guilt. A man hiding in a closet in a phone store 13 hours after 2 armed carjackings knows exactly what he did. The state of Illinois moved quickly with charges. 2 felony counts of aggravated vehicular hijacking with a firearm, 1 felony count of aggravated unlawful restraint, and 1 felony count of armed aggravated kidnapping. Judge Charles Beach denied bail at the detention hearing, citing the violent nature of the charges and the fact that he was already on pretrial release for the machine gun case. That prior case was the critical context. The court had already given him a chance. He was already supposed to be following conditions of release. The commission of 2 more violent felonies while on bond told the court everything it needed to know about the risk he posed. 3 months later, in July 2024, the federal government escalated. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Illinois brought a federal grand jury indictment with 7 counts. When the feds indict, they're not guessing. By the time that indictment is signed, they have built a case they believe they can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. The indictment laid out the details of both carjackings with specificity: times, block numbers, victims' ages, vehicle makes and models, the forced money transfer, the sequence of events. This was not an indictment built on thin evidence. What the federal charges do that state charges cannot is tie everything together under the machine gun enhancement. 3 separate counts for using a machine gun during the commission of a violent crime. Under federal sentencing guidelines, using a firearm that qualifies as a machine gun during a violent crime carries mandatory consecutive sentencing on top of the base offense. These are not small enhancements. These are years added on top of years, with no possibility of parole in the federal system. Legal analysts who reviewed the indictment publicly stated that if convicted on all counts consecutively, PGF Nuck could face life in federal prison. Not a decade, not a stretch he could reasonably plan around. Life gone forever. At 22 years old, for 2 gas station carjackings in 30 minutes on a night that almost certainly felt in the moment like nothing out of the ordinary for a man still living by the code of Inglewood. His music career is effectively frozen. The Alamo deal, whatever future projects were in the works, the next album, the features, the performances, all of it is suspended indefinitely pending the outcome of federal proceedings that will determine whether Virgil Gibson ever walks free again. This story doesn't end with PGF Nuck in a courtroom. It extends to every young rapper coming up out of Inglewood, out of the South Side, out of any city where drill music is both the art form and the autobiography of the streets. Because what happened to Virgil Gibson is not unique to him. It is a pattern so deeply embedded in the culture that it threatens to consume the most talented voices in Chicago's next generation before they ever fully arrive. Chief Keef left Chicago for his safety. Lil Durk has lost brothers and friends to gun violence and has spoken about the cost of the streets directly in his music. G Herbo has spoken extensively about trauma, about loss, about the way Inglewood marks every man who grows up there. These are artists who found ways to build careers while navigating the realities of where they came from. PGF Nuck had the same opportunity, the same connections, the same city, the same label support. And the outcome so far is profoundly different. His breakout single, What Up, reached 70 million global streams. His debut album, Switch Music, hit #2 on the Billboard Heatseekers chart. He performed alongside Lil Durk. He was named by multiple outlets as a frontrunner in Chicago's newest generation of drill. Polo G, his cousin, one of the biggest rappers alive, had publicly endorsed him. By any measure, PGF Nuck had cleared the launch pad. He had achieved escape velocity from the streets that most Chicago drill artists only dream of achieving. And then he went back, not in a song, not in a lyric, actually, physically, on the streets, allegedly with a gun, taking cars and money from innocent people at gas stations at midnight. The music that remains, the What Up, Switch Music, the singles, stands as a testament to what was possible. The Chicago Reader called What Up a standout drill record. Music critics praised Nuck's unique delivery, his let each bar breathe style, his ability to make a drill record feel human and personal. Audiomac's interview with him in 2022 revealed a young man with genuine introspection, genuine love for his mother, genuine grief for the people he had lost, genuine hunger to succeed. This was not a performer without substance. This was a real person with real gifts. But gifts don't protect you from federal indictments. Authenticity doesn't walk you out of a janitor's closet. Platinum certifications don't undo 2 carjackings in 30 minutes. Today, the #FreeNuck posts float across social media. Fans hold out hope. His music streams tick upward because controversy drives curiosity. But the reality of what faces Virgil Gibson in a federal courtroom before U.S. District Judge Virginia M. Kendall is not a social media campaign. It is a 7-count federal indictment from the Department of Justice, backed by the full investigative resources of the United States government, built on surveillance footage, victim testimony, physical evidence, and a prior criminal record that made it all but impossible for any judge to extend further benefit of the doubt. The music industry lost a genuinely distinctive voice. Chicago drill lost another one of its sons to a cycle that shows no signs of slowing down. And Virgil Gibson, who was selling candy at 15, who lost Psycho and carried that loss in his name, who was making bacon and freestyling when he accidentally created the song that changed his life, is sitting in federal custody at 22, potentially facing the rest of his life in a prison cell. That is what it costs to be a crash dummy. That is what it costs to have $6 million on the table and choose the streets instead. That is the story of PGF Nuck, a man who had everything rap could give him, who understood what the streets take, who watched his friends die and still couldn't leave, who signed the deal and charted the album and got the Polo G verse and still went back to where he started. No cap, this is one of the saddest stories in recent Chicago hip-hop, not because he died, because the talent is still alive, locked away in a federal holding facility, while the music plays on without him and the streets wait patiently for the next one. The community, the industry, the culture, they deserve better outcomes than this. And until the system changes, until there are real off-ramps for young men in Inglewood who have been shaped by survival and loyalty and loss since childhood, there will be more PGF Nucks. Different names, different songs, same story. Different gas stations, same janitor's closet. Stay up, stay informed, and if you're from the streets, find a way out that doesn't cost you everything. Because the streets don't love you back. PGF Nuck had proof of that. He had the platinum record to show it was possible. He had the label deal to show the door was open. He walked back through anyway, and that's the story.